Park, despite years of activism calling for it to be taken down. In St. Johns County, a parent says she may file a federal lawsuit after she claims a teacher repeatedly used the N-word while discussing Huckleberry Finn in class. In Jacksonville, a waitress says she was fired from a restaurant after complaining about a customer who came to a Halloween party wearing blackface. And of course, in Georgia, jury selection continues in the trial of the men accused of murdering Ahmaud Arbery. The prosecution will argue that killing was motivated by racism. And of course, critical race theory isn't even a subject that's taught in Florida schools. It's only taught in law school. Yet many people, misled by misinformation about it, continue to call for it to be banned in their kids' classrooms. There is so much to discuss, so we're pleased to welcome back to the show Dr. Tammy Hodo, Executive Director of All Things Diverse. She's on the line. Dr. Hodo, good morning.
Good morning, Melissa. Thank you for having me.
Give us a call as we talk about race in the 904, folks, 549-2937. Emails to firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. Tweets to @MelissaNJax. Our Facebook page always open. Dr. Hodo, just a long list of things that have happened just in the last few weeks to remind us once again how difficult this is for this community. What are your thoughts as I tick through that list?
My heart is hurting, obviously, but I can't say that I'm really surprised. I think that people are feeling really emboldened and empowered, and they feel this sense of entitlement. And we've seen the constant policing of people of color. So I can't say that I'm really surprised, but I am extremely disappointed, especially with the response at the school. For the Black teens to be suspended after tussling, which I kind of would anticipate from that very racist video that they were sent, and for them to be the ones reprimanded is pretty astonishing to me. But then again, that's kind of the status quo that I see in the First Coast.
You're talking about the incident in Nassau County schools in Yulee. The school says that because the Black students got physical, that they had to follow school policy and suspend the Black students, and that because the video that the white students made was made off campus, that their ability to discipline those students is limited. And so, that's just one incident out of many that have happened in just the last few weeks in our community. This is a systemic problem, a systemic issue. Tell us about your work at All Things Diverse and how you try to start conversations in the community about race and racism.
So what we do at All Things Diverse is we really try to move us from that social construct of race, because race is not biologically real. It's a social construct, but it's something that continues to have real-world implications in America, and it impacts life choices and opportunities. And so what we're really trying to do is to deconstruct that and get people to understand that, as a society, we are so much more productive if we focus on our similarities versus our differences. And so we work with organizations to help them really diversify their workforce, to gain an understanding and respect for cultural differences, and to begin engaging in that anti-racism work that is just so important and much needed in our society overall. So it's something that we're really dedicated to, and just educating people, because I think that's one of the issues. And you brought up critical race theory, and just people hear these sound bites and they're not using their critical thinking skills to understand the different barriers and the systemic issues that we have in our society, and just how much stronger we can be together.
It's 549-2937. Give us a call. Dr. Hodo, as you talk about anti-racism and work to educate the public on what that means, we're also seeing, not just in this community, but really across the country right now, a real backlash to people who are very hostile to what they describe as woke politics or cultural wokeness. For example, in Virginia right now, it's down to the wire in the election for governor. The election in Virginia will be held tomorrow between Democrat Terry McAuliffe and Republican Glenn Youngkin. Just a few years ago in Charlottesville, Virginia, racist demonstrators marched with tiki torches. Of course, it led to the death of a woman named Heather Heyer. And so that governor's contest is turning on these issues because the backlash is strong in this country when we try to move the conversation forward on issues of race. How do you see that, and how do you see this country moving through that?
I think that oftentimes when we talk about race, we do see a demographic change in our society. And I think what we're seeing is a lot of fear. Minorities are going to be the majority shortly in America. And I think that creates a lot of fear for our European American brothers and sisters. But I just find it ironic because if everything's been fair and equitable, why is there fear in the change of the demographics in America? So I'm not sure if people think that we will begin to treat people as we have been treated historically. But the reality is that the world is changing and that we should all embrace this change. But I think that there is a lot of fear, and I think that fear has been stoked by political rhetoric that has been very hateful and very intentional to create this division that we see in society based on things such as that social construct of race, religion, gender identity, and things of that nature.
Mm. There's another recent incident we want to discuss briefly. The mother of a student at St. Augustine High School tells WJCT News her daughter filed a complaint and may have to leave her gifted class after complaining about a teacher's use of the N-word when discussing a great novel, Huckleberry Finn. Here is Mother Helen Jeter telling me about this incident.
She used the pejorative term, which is the N-word, as an adjective describing him, which was common at that time, and it was part of the satire of the author. The problem is that she used the word, which elicited a variety of reactions from students in the class, and many students were stunned, according to my daughter, Natalie. And she felt quite uncomfortable, which led her to advocate for herself, which we're very proud of, and go speak with the dean, who then referred it to the proper administrator to handle.
Helen Jeter says she does not believe the incident was addressed properly. She may even file a lawsuit over this. We will hopefully hear from the St. Johns County School District about this incident soon. But Dr. Hodo, I bring this up because so much of this anger in this country right now is focused on our schools, whether it's incidents like the one we just heard from, the non-existent teaching of critical race theory in schools. It does not exist. Anger over mask mandates. The backlash seems to be so centered on schools. Your thoughts?
Well, the education system, the father of the Common Core of Education was Horace Mann, and the belief was that it was going to be the great equalizer. But I think that we've continued to see that there are disparities very much based on social economic status and the quality of the schools within certain districts. I definitely believe that, we need to have these conversations. I think that the teacher in St. Johns County could have said, this word was used, but we're going to refer to it as the N-word. I don't think the word should be removed from the book because it was relevant and that was a word that was used at that time. But I think it also shows the level of hate as well as misunderstanding towards African Americans, but it's relevant during that time. But to continuously stand there and use the word is not advantageous or does not create a culture that is conducive for these students to learn. And as you mentioned, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
And I said, and as you mentioned, I find it, funny actually, that people have these strong feelings about critical race theory, and they are so misinformed because it's not taught in the K through 12 system. And I'm struggling as a biracial person in America with this thing about, is it heritage or is it hate? Because if it's heritage and not hate, then why are you so afraid of teaching the true history of America, which is very much based on that social construct of race, the genocide of our indigenous population, Japanese internment camps, hatred towards Irish, Polish, and Italian when they initially came. I just really struggle with that. Do we want to teach the truth to ensure that we don't repeat that, or do we want to sugarcoat it to make everyone feel warm and fuzzy?
Right. I recommend for people who feel they haven't gotten the full education in school and they have to sort of make it up as an adult, which I think is common for many Americans, Howard Zinn's classic, A People's History of the United States, tells the accurate story of this country. So check that out. 549-2937. April in Fleming Island. Hi, April. Go ahead, April. You're on the air.
Melissa.
2937.
Hi, Melissa. How are you?
Great.
I'm calling. I'm a parent, an African American parent, and I live in Fleming Island. And yesterday, my son got his first car. And when we got home, one of the things that he was concerned with was how to respond when he would be pulled over by the police. And we literally had to go through a training in my house about how he should respond, keep his hands on the steering wheel, let the officer know every move he was making in order for him to not be shot because of maybe just being pulled over for something minor. And so I think that also is a problem here in our country. Again, what Dr. Hodo is saying is just one of the things that really saddens me is that with all that we have accomplished, I still have to have those types of conversations with my black son to make sure that he will get home safely from wherever he went as he drives his car for the first time. So that was just my comment on that.
Thanks, April. And I'm sorry that that's talk you have to have with your son. Dr. Hodo.
Well, and Dr. Murdaugh, I know April quite well, and I also have an African American son, and we have what's called Life 360 on our phones. Our son is a sophomore at Florida State, and we track his moves, and it's the same thing. We had to have that talk when you're stopped, and it's really not if you're stopped. And by no means am I anti-police. I used to be a probation officer. I relied on them. I know that the vast majority are good. But I think the problem is that we have that lack of integration. If you look at Jacksonville, we sit at a 56 on the index of dissimilarity, which means this is not truly an integrated city. You want to be closer to 1. It goes from 1 to 100. And so what happens is we're not engaging with people outside of our communities. And we all have biases, whether we want to acknowledge them or not. And if we depict or if our understanding of certain cultures and communities is based off of the media, oftentimes it is not a good image. And just like Dr. Murdaugh, I also had to have that conversation with my son, but I found some states are actually stopping the police from doing those minor traffic stops because they do recognize, as she indicated, that people of color are more prone to have issues, whether they be shot, tased, arrested for minor offenses.
I think it's important that you just said that this isn't an indictment of the police. This is an indictment of society, which police are a part of. If we all have unconscious biases, that includes people who aren't sworn law enforcement and people who are. People who are sworn law enforcement carry a gun and a badge. And so it's a lot more fraught when a law enforcement officer and someone who is pulled over for speeding or whatever the offense may be. It's a more fraught, dangerous situation if, like everyone else in society, officers carry these implicit biases that we're all raised with. And so I just thought it was important to clarify that because certainly right now, police feel they're being attacked. They feel on the defensive. They feel they're all being painted with the same brush, accused of racism and such. This is a systemic issue, which you talk about a lot, Dr. Hodo. Lots of calls, 549-2937. Tom on the West Side. Hi, Tom.
Good morning. I just wanted to say that while we were protesting, while we were picketing outside of Culhane's yesterday, we received a lot of support, and that's really encouraging. On the negative side, the collapse of the Safer Together Committee Would
Yeah,
that
that's
be
another
very,
issue. I forgot to mention
yeah,
that one.
yeah.
Go ahead, Tom.
With the aspect of how that impacts on the black community is a little troublesome.
Yeah, thank you for that. I completely forgot to add that to my long list. Tom, thank you. The effort at criminal justice reform in Jacksonville fell apart a few weeks ago when Councilman Michael Boylan quit, said that he didn't want to do it anymore. That upset a lot of people. Now, let me reference what that caller mentioned about the restaurant. A little later in the hour, we will hear from Nina Ward, a UNF student and a waitress who says she was fired from Culhane's Irish Pub after complaining about a customer who appeared at a Halloween event at the restaurant in blackface. Here's an email from Ed. He says, if someone who is black dresses up as a white person, is that racist or inappropriate? Let's talk about blackface for a minute, Dr. Hodo, and why it's so offensive to people of color, because we continue to get questions about this. People, not understanding what the big deal is, not seeing this as something worthy of leaving in the dustbin of history. Can you talk about this?
Sure. Blackface has been around in the U.S. since the 1800s, after the end of slavery, and it is very demoralizing. It has been used to depict African Americans as lazy buffoons. They often paint their faces black with these really big red accentuated lips and big eyes. It is never okay to wear someone's complexion. That beautiful melanin skin that we have is not a costume. It is never okay to wear someone's, like we see this often too with our indigenous population, our Hispanic population. Someone's culture is not a costume. When I want to dress up, if I want it to be Barbie or anything that is very Eurocentric, which is pretty standard in America, I do not paint my brown face white. I wear the costume, and people actually know who I am. And it could be the same for European Americans. If this lady was Tina Turner, she could have put on a wig, she could have worn a certain attire, and they would have known who she was. To put on blackface, or as per what I heard Cohan say, dark bronzer, that's rather offensive. I often want to ask the question of my European American brothers and sisters, how many of you all are willing to change places with us and actually be our color versus just for that one day?
This whole issue is fascinating because people who become angry when they're challenged on things like blackface will point out hypocrisies on the left. For example, Megyn Kelly of Fox was hired by NBC News and then fired after she made a really insensitive comment on the air about blackface, right? Immediately, conservatives said, well, what about Jimmy Kimmel or Ted Danson or even Joy Behar from The View? They all appeared in blackface and nothing happened to them. Why does cancel culture only happen on the right, they might say. And so this is how these conversations get politicized, and they really do animate a lot of the anger on the right. Rather than understanding how people of color might feel about this, they turn it to that conversation, that argument. I'm wondering what you think about that.
Well, I think this goes to, we know Black lives don't matter. I mean, when Black people, or people of color speak up and say something, the commentary is, always, what about Black on Black crime? What about white on white crime? It's geographically based. When Ted Danson was in blackface, there was a lot of backlash. I remember that. He was on stage with Whoopi Goldberg, and I think they were intimate or whatever, they were dating or whatever. And that was not okay. And I'm sure had they spoke with people in the African American community, they would have expressed their disdain for that as well. So I don't understand how it gets so politicized, because it's all about just divisiveness. And we as a nation really need to come together. It just makes no sense to me why we continue to see the amount of hate crimes. And when you look at the statistics, the number one is solely based on race, ethnicity, and ancestry bias. And then we have the religious bias, our Jewish brothers and sisters, or our Muslim brothers and sisters. and just, people not understanding other people's cultures, religions, and that those aren't costumes. Those are not things for you to take and make your own. And there's the saying we often hear in the Black community: they love our culture, but they surely don't love us.
Mm. Dave in Nassauville. Hi, Dave. Good morning.
Call.
Yeah, go ahead.
What I see happening is this idea that there's a lot of shame in the white community about the treatment of blacks, although nobody wants to really admit that there's that shame, because there has been institutional racism for a long time. And there's this attitude that people that know that there have been inequities and there has been unfairness and there has been a number of ways in which people of color have been marginalized, but the attitude is that, well, okay, we had a black president, racism is over, let's move on. And that's an unfortunate but common short-sighted mindset that a lot of people, particularly those on the right, have. I take my response off the air.
Thank you, Dave. 5492937. Rosa on the west side. Go ahead, Rosa.
Hello. So my opinion about this whole situation at Darnell Cookman with this teacher and this young lady is the only reason I'm calling is because I had a discussion with my daughter, who happens to know this young lady personally. First of all, she's not black.
I think you're talking about a different incident, Rosa. I'm not. Can you explain a little bit more?
The incident that happened with the teacher that was discussing of Mice and Men. I think it was of Mice and Men, the book.
That's a different incident than the one we were just talking about in St. Johns County. But go ahead.
Okay. I'm sorry about that. Okay.
No problem.
And so my daughter is 13 years old. She comes from, I am first generation Mexican American, and so is my husband, and my daughter, obviously second generation Mexican American. Particularly for our family, my husband and I really never had any incidents because we were raised in California. It wasn't until we came here to Jacksonville where these things were a little bit more in our face. And now that, we had our daughters here in Jacksonville, they're faced with dealing with racism and the meaning of what it is, or actually understanding what it is. And so we've tried very hard to tell them, you can't, I don't want you to be judging people based on the color of their skin, but it's repeatedly an issue here for whatever reason. And it's just so unfortunate, both for the teacher who handled it very poorly and for this young lady who actually made a comment online. And what my daughter told me was that the teacher actually read it from a book. She didn't say it, nor discuss it. And obviously, if you've read the book, it's an amazing book. I read it myself.
Are you talking about
school.
Huckleberry Finn?
I think it was of Mice and Men.
But yeah, Rosa, I mean, whether either one, they're classics of literature that were written in a different era. Sure.
Exactly. And that's exactly what my point was with my daughter. So this is what my 13-year-old daughter said. She says, but Mom, it shouldn't even be read off of a book. It's so offensive. It shouldn't be read off of a book. And I told my daughter, I said, no, these are actual things that happen. We have a whole different issues that happen with our own race. I started, just naming off names like Cesar Chavez and just a whole random other section, other things that have happened to us as minorities, as Mexican Americans. I said, but these things happened and we can't turn our face away from them. It's good that you're learning about this. It shouldn't be used against, minorities or blacks or Mexicans or Asians. It's just such a shame that we take these things and it destroys people's lives. Like this teacher, she's a very good teacher, obviously, what I've heard. And she handled something so poorly and, in essence, ruined a little bit of her career, right? I don't know what's going to happen to her.
Right.
But then this little girl who I'm sure, understands it and tried, to say, oh, my goodness, they're giving an award to the teacher who uses the N-word, and completely takes it out of context because actually what happened is she read it off of a book. So how do you handle those things? It's frustrating.
I know it. Thank you, Rosa. Thank you so much for sharing all of those thoughts. Dr. Hodo, let's close with your thoughts about that.
I think the gentleman who called before Rosa, I would like to address, and I totally agree with him. I think that there's a lot of shame, but people need to understand this is not about shame or guilt. This is the history of our country. And yes, there has been a lot of privilege, and people have benefited from, this very systemic issue that deals with that social construct of race. And when we had Obama as president, I heard the same thing, we've got a black president. President Obama is just like myself. He is biracial. I have never in my life met a biracial person who identifies as black or white. We identify as biracial. And in regards to what Rosa said, I agree. I think that the teacher should be able to, it's written in the book, but I think you have to put it in the correct context and explain to the students. And it also depends, though, on how the teacher enunciates that. And we know that language matters. And sometimes the way people enunciate things, you can tell is very disparaging. So that also matters. So I would say, yes, this is the term that was used at that time. I would probably use it one time, and then after that, I would use the N-word, and I am a person of color, and I would do that. But I would make sure that my students were educated that this is real. This is our history. This is what our nation was built upon. And in order not to repeat these things, we have to address them.
Always great to have you on. Dr. Tammy Hodo, who heads up All Things Diverse and consults on these issues, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Melissa.
Much more still ahead. Later, no treats, just tricks for the Jaguars over Halloween. Our Josh Torres will talk sports, but up next.
Friday, October 22nd, Culhane was hosting a costume contest event with a band for customers, and staff was allowed to dress up as well.
We continue the conversation about race in the 904 as a former waitress says she lost her job after complaining about a customer in blackface. That's next.
Marks Gray, dedicated to helping Florida's businesses manage their complex legal issues for more than 120 years. Marks Gray is proud to support WJCT and public broadcasting. Learn more at marksgray.com. Offices in Jacksonville. ViStar believes that saving money is better, so they don't charge for things like savings or checking, and they have lower rates on loans and credit cards. Learn more about all that ViStar has to offer at vistarcu.org. Citizens Property Insurance. Whether recovering or preparing, Citizens is available. Claims can be tracked at citizensfla.com or reported by calling a live Citizens rep 24/7.
Welcome back. Well, UNF student Nina Ward says she was fired from Culhane's Irish Pub on the South Side earlier this month after she complained about a customer wearing blackface there during a Halloween party event. People upset with this whole issue picketed Culhane's over the weekend. We reached out to Culhane's about this issue and did not get a reply back. But I did speak with Nina, who is black, about her experience and the ongoing outcry. Here's that conversation. Nina Ward, it's good to talk to you, and thanks for joining us.
Yes, thank you for having me.
So your post about your experience as a waitress at Culhane's Irish Pub on Jacksonville's South Side has gotten a lot of attention. Can you tell us what happened? Take us back to the incident that you posted about. What happened?
Yeah, you got it. So Friday, October 22nd, Culhane's was hosting a costume contest event with a band for customers, and staff was allowed to dress up as well. And partway through the night, during my shift, a lady comes in wearing blackface. I do a double take. I confirm with my other servers that they see what I'm seeing and that this lady is 100% in blackface. I go up to the lady herself. I ask her, what is she dressed up as? To which she responds proudly, Tina Turner. I explained to her why her costume is offensive, that there was no need for her to paint herself and to overline her lips like that and all this stuff, to which she did not care. And so I stormed to the back of the restaurant, extremely upset to see this woman. And I go to my manager, Christine Moore, and owner, Mary Jane Culhane, expressing my fury and discomfort with this lady, and asked for the situation to be handled, to which I told it would be. So then I leave and I go back to serving my tables, talking to coworkers. I talked to a black gentleman at the bar, asking his opinion on the situation. He was equally as furious as me. And so I see that this lady is still being served. I feel that she is still enjoying her time. So I go back again to management. Mary Jane had left at this point without talking to me after the fact. And I was now speaking to Christine Moore, who said that they were not going to do anything about this lady, that Mary Jane handled the situation, and that if I was uncomfortable serving with this woman in the restaurant, that I could transfer my tables and clock out. So that is what I did. The following day, or later that night, around midnight, 1 in the morning, my shift for Saturday, the 23rd, was taken off my schedule, and I was told that that was because I needed time to, quote, relax. And then Saturday, I was told to call into my job, to which I did, to which I was fired in a very brief phone call with no reason by a manager who was not there for the incident that I had worked under for over a year, and that is what happened.
Okay. You know, for those who, for whatever reason, still don't understand this, blackface is extremely offensive and racist because it goes back to the Jim Crow era and the tradition of minstrelsy, when white performers would go on stage in blackface to mock and dehumanize African Americans. And so it is hurtful. It is offensive. It's as offensive, to people of color as using, say, the N-word. And so what are your thoughts about the outcry since all of this has happened?
I think it is amazing the amount of support that I've gotten during all of this from not only members of the Black community, but also, white people, non-POCs, also, Asian people, Hispanic people, Indian people, everyone of every demographic and walk of life has acknowledged has acknowledged how offensive this is and how wrong this is and how this is absolutely unacceptable behavior, and that is really amazing to see.
That's good to hear. Now, what's your reaction to those who defended Culhane's and said that the customer is always right? In other words, as the rationale for not asking that diner to leave.
It's frustrating, and it is disheartening that people can still find a way to try to defend something so blatantly wrong. As businesses, the restaurants have the right to refuse service for any reason. There is no excuse that this woman was still allowed to be served. But with any issue, no matter how black and white it may seem, and no matter how clearly there is a right side, no one will ever 100% agree. So while it's extremely frustrating and disheartening, I am not letting it get to me, and I am not entertaining these people that are going to have these opinions no matter what I say.
Have you picked up a waitress job anywhere else?
At the moment, not yet. I have been offered many jobs. I have been put in contact with so many people. Thankfully, I have options, but with everything going on, it has been a very overwhelming past couple of days and getting everything sorted. So I have not had time to figure out what my next step is in terms of a job.
Well, we'll check back with you. UNF student Nina Ward, thanks for sharing your story.
Absolutely.
Well, here's something great. Greenscape's annual tree giveaway is coming up this month. It's your chance to get your hands on up to 3 free trees for your home or business. Now, the Great Greenscape Tree Giveaway is happening in conjunction with a paper recycling and shredding event from Keep Jacksonville Beautiful. Lisa Gruba is Interim Executive Director of Greenscape of Jax. Hey, Lisa, good morning.
Good morning, Melissa.
So this is one of the most anticipated events of the year. I mean, who doesn't like free stuff? And you're giving away
Right.
trees. So tell us about the tree giveaway.
Absolutely. We have been doing this for 32 years in Jacksonville. And this year, Greenscape is partnering with Keep Jacksonville Beautiful to do both a tree giveaway and a paper collection event. Now, last year they shredded on site. This year they're just collecting the bags of paper and they will take them off site to shred, which will keep it moving a little faster. So the public can bring up to 2 30-gallon bags of paper documents, and you can either go through the recycle line or the tree line or the recycle plus free tree line. And we will be giving away 3 trees. You can choose from a Shumard oak, a winged elm, redbud, crepe myrtle, holly, or cypress tree.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah.
Right.
And this is happening at Lot E at TIAA Bank Field. That's the lot where the
Right.
Florida Georgia RV City typically takes up residence. And, you know, Lisa, with the
Exactly.
with the pause on curbside recycling, this is a good opportunity for people who want to recycle too.
Very much so. And last year, we had a lot of attendance. And so this year we will have more JSO traffic officers in order to keep the line moving quickly. So, come on down to TIAA Bank Field and pick up your trees and drop off some documents.
Can you talk a little bit about this tradition? Greenscape of Jacksonville has been doing this for decades, and it's all about increasing the tree canopy in this city. Can you talk about your mission and why that's so important?
Greenscape's mission is to plant, protect, and promote. And we are the oldest tree planting organization in the city. We were founded by 2 philanthropists in order to beautify the city and to, provide the ecological benefits that trees provide. And planting on private land is one way of increasing the urban tree canopy in Jacksonville. Getting trees into the hands of private property owners is just one more way of increasing the number of trees. In fact, we have a board member who picked up a 3-gallon tree at one of our events 20 years ago, and today it shades her entire front yard. So it's a great benefit for the public in terms of shade for their yards or water uptake. If you have a low spot in your yard and you need some water, absorbed, trees are basically pumps. And so planting trees can provide a lot of different benefits.
And, as the big UN climate conference begins today in Glasgow, this is a simple way everyone can do their part by adding to the tree canopy. The more trees we have, the more carbon we capture.
That's right.
Now, Lisa, these are not big trees. These are saplings, essentially. You can take them home in your car, right? And
That's right.
And people might need help, instructions on how to plant them. Do you provide that?
We absolutely do. We, on the tree tag, will be instructions for planting. Now, in past years, the urban forestry team from the city of Jacksonville has been on site in addition to University of Florida Extension agents to talk to the public. We're not doing that this year because of COVID concerns. So the whole event will be contactless and drive-through. You basically will pop your trunk and volunteers will load up the trees. But we will provide information on our social media channels and on our website about best practices for planting and watering the tree.
You can learn more at greenscapeofjax.org. We're speaking right now with Lisa Gruba, Interim Executive Director of Greenscape of Jacksonville, about their upcoming Great Tree Giveaway. They're going to give away up to 2,000 free trees to the public. Keep Jacksonville Beautiful will also be on site. They will collect up to 2 30-gallon bags of paper documents per car. They will either recycle your paper or shred your paper. If you have been fretting over the lack of curbside recycling lately in Jacksonville, this is one way you can do something about that. You're already getting calls, Lisa, because you're so popular about the tree giveaway. And Mark tweets the show. Please give the date and time for the tree and recycling event. Let's say it again. This is the annual free tree giveaway from Greenscape and a paper collection event in partnership with Keep Jacksonville Beautiful. This is coming up Saturday, November 13th, 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Lot E, right. Lot E, TIAA Bank Field. It's, if you know where the RV City is, Florida-Georgia game, it's over there. It's Lot E across from TIAA Bank Field. People just drive through, as you said, Lisa. They never even have to leave their car?
That's right. And we also welcome volunteers. We have many, many volunteers who help out at the event. And so you can go to our website at greenscapeofjax.org to sign up to volunteer. If you're a high school student, we do give service hours. So you'll get a nice chunk of service hours on Friday afternoon or Saturday morning or both. And so we appreciate our volunteers and are looking forward to seeing a return of many of our favorite volunteers again.
Oh, that's also great to note. Again, Greenscape of Jax, not this coming Saturday, but next Saturday, November 13th from 9 a.m. to 1, come drive through Lot E at TIAA Bank Field, pick up to 3 free trees for your home or business, and recycle or shred all of your paper. Lisa Gruba.
And Melissa, the reason that we partner with Keep Jacksonville Beautiful for this is they're celebrating America Recycles Day, which is a national day. We're celebrating Jacksonville's Arbor Day. The National Arbor Day is typically in April, but that's late in the planting season in Florida. So that's why we do it in November, which is earlier in the planting season. That gives your tree a good chance to get established before the heat of the summer.
Excellent. Again, Saturday, November 13th, Lot E, TIAA Bank Field, 9 a.m. to 1, the Great Tree Giveaway. Lisa Gruba of Greenscape. Have fun.
Thanks a lot, Melissa.
Speaking of the stadium, it wasn't any treats over Halloween weekend, only tricks for the Jaguars. Josh Torres will tell us about the Halloween massacre by the Seahawks next.
Lee & Kate's Glass, family owned and operated for 95 years. Lee & Kate's Glass is your source for upgrading your home's glass, from shower doors and mirrors to windows and tabletops. Learn more at leeandkatesglass.com. Cindy Tomasetti of Engel & Volkers is committed to her customers. Whether it's buying or selling, Cindy uses decades of experience in real estate and marketing to deliver 5-star service. Information at northeastfloridarealtor.com. Teach returns to the First Coast on Saturday, November 13th at the Hyatt Regency Jacksonville. This day-long conference for educators of all grades features keynote presentations from Ron Clark and Dr. Talithia Williams, along with 21 concurrent breakout sessions from local educators. Visit wjct.org/teach for additional details and to get your tickets now.
On the next Fresh Air, filmmaker Edgar Wright. His movies include Baby Driver and Shaun of the Dead. His newest is a thriller called Last Night in Soho. It's about a young woman who is transported in her dreams into the swinging 60s of London, where she lives out the life of another woman. At first thrilling, the dreams become nightmares that haunt her waking hours. Join us.
Today at noon on WJCT News 89.9. Higher inflation is starting to hit home. From gas to groceries, prices are going up, and it's threatening to turn a simmering economic issue into a major political one.
I don't have a near-term answer.
Can the Biden administration find a fix? Your stories as we focus on inflation next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Well, the sports complex was jumping this weekend with the Florida-Georgia game, but sadly there were no treats for Jaguars fans yesterday, only tricks, thanks to a big loss to the Seattle Seahawks. Our sports analyst, Josh Torres, watched all the action and has some ideas about it. Hey, Josh.
Hey there, Melissa.
Okay, so tell us about the big L, yet another one, by the Jaguars.
Yes, unfortunately, the Jags were coming off of their bye week after getting their first win against Miami. And they traveled to Seattle to take on the Seahawks, obviously with the hope that they could keep that momentum going from getting that first win. And they did not. This was not a good game in any sense of the word. Again, a lot of the same mistakes the team has just been making all year. And now I will give them a little bit of benefit of the doubt, because the fact Seattle is a very tough place to go and play. Their fans are known for being very, very loud and making it a very tough atmosphere. But it was just the simple mistakes, guys not being able to get lined up correctly, getting called for offsides, false starts. The very simple things that have been plaguing this team all year just continued after this bye week. And even Urban Meyer was almost perplexed by it. He even said, I thought we had a really great week of practice. It seemed like we were all fired up and ready to go. And then we kind of came in and almost fell flat on our faces. Trevor Lawrence was 32 for 54. He had 238 yards. He had a touchdown, but it came at the tail end of the game. I think there was only about a minute and 40 seconds left on the clock when most of the Seattle starting defense is already out. And he also threw his 9th interception of the season. It was just a very bad game for the team overall. There were a lot of dropped passes, miscommunications, and on the interception, you could clearly tell that he was expecting his receiver to go one way and his receiver went the other way, so he threw it right to a defender. It was just a very bad game, especially for Trevor. It's the same thing we've been saying all year, where it sucks because you can tell the talent is there, but then you just see these games happen.
And yet Urban Meyer survives with all these losses and his personal scandals. What about that?
Right now, as I said, after the win, I think he's going to survive for a little while. But, this weekend, Bills Mafia is coming to town. That is going to be a very tough game that I personally, and I think a lot of fans, as I've seen on Twitter, do not expect the Jags to do well in. And if these losses keep piling up, I thought maybe after getting that first win, they would at least keep some of these games coming up close. Urban Meyer might survive it to the end of the season, but if they play like they did yesterday, I do not see him surviving the end of the season, because they got a very tough stretch of games coming up very soon. But like I said, this weekend they are taking on the Buffalo Bills and Bills Mafia, so everybody make sure you lock up your plastic tables. Otherwise, they might end up broken in half somewhere in a parking lot. The Jags ultimately yesterday lost 31-7 to the Seahawks, and this week is not shaping up to be any different.
Okay. Sad news as we kick off November, but let's talk college football. The world's largest outdoor cocktail party took over the sports complex, as they always do this weekend.
Oh, yes, and it was a packed house. This game's always big for Jacksonville, especially when you talk to people who have just moved here. We have a lot of people who are moving here lately. When they ask you, what's Florida, Georgia like? And you kind of just go, you have to come and see it. Like, it is one of those things where you have to see it to realize how big it is for Jacksonville. Georgia was coming into this game undefeated, ranked number 1. Florida was trying to put Georgia on the upset alert and give them their first loss of the season. Anthony Richardson started for the Gators. This is a move that fans have been asking all season. Emory Jones hasn't been playing particularly bad, but he also hasn't been lights out. So a lot of people wanted to see Anthony Richardson, and he got the start. And it took about 2 minutes for the Bulldogs defense to turn this game on its heels. They were, Bulldogs were up about at 3-0 going late into the first half, and then they forced 3 turnovers, including a pick six in just a little under 2 minutes that turned the game from being a 3-0 Bulldog lead to a 24-0 lead going into the half. And Georgia would hold on to that lead for the rest of the game, winning 34-7 and keep their undefeated record going, while the Gators are dropped to 4-4. They're 500 on the season, and Dan Mullen's seat is starting to get hotter and hotter by the second, especially after yet another loss to a rival team. And just it seems like whatever he's doing right now is just not working. And so his seat is definitely going to be a lot hotter.
Okay. A little bit of time left. Let's talk hockey.
Yes. This is actually, unfortunately, everybody, this is going to be a little bit of some rather bad news. This is a report that came out about Florida Panthers head coach Joe Quenneville, who was forced to resign after a report was released detailing something that happened during his time as the Chicago Blackhawks coach. A former player, Kyle Beach, had accused a former video coach of sexually assaulting him while he was with the team in 2010, and the team was made aware of it, and they, according to this report that actually the team participated in and asked for, they did nothing. Even Joe Quenneville, who was the head coach at the time, was told about it and essentially said, we're in the playoffs right now. We can't deal with this. And they waited till after the playoffs were done before they basically gave that coach an ultimatum.
And long story short, he lost his job.
Yep.
He's out. Okay. All right. Well, that's unfortunate. But I want to thank you for updating all our listeners. Lots of sports always, as we discuss it every Monday. Thank you, Josh Torres.
Thank you, Melissa.
And that's our show. I'm Melissa Ross. Have a great Monday. Be safe. We'll be right back here again at 9 a.m. tomorrow.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
Wayne Hogan of the Terrell Hogan Law Firm.
I'm Wayne Hogan. The Move Over Law protects police, fire, EMS, utility, and sanitation personnel by requiring drivers to move over and slow down for their vehicles.
Learn more at waynehogan.law.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect with Melissa Ross. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
Announcing Vickers Landing at Oak Bridge, bridging retirees with an all-new Ponte Vedra Beach community featuring new homes, a resort lifestyle, and a life plan for every stage of aging. Information at vickerslanding.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Ahead in the next 5 minutes, live local news for the First Coast from the WJCT News team.
Workers are quitting, prices are jumping, and the supply chain is struggling to stay linked. What's happening with our economy? From WAMU and NPR in Washington, this is 1A. Hi, I'm Jen White. Today on 1A, inflation and the economy. Last year, much of the world was forced to put its economy on ice. This year, countries like the U.S. are trying to thaw it, and it's taking a lot longer than consumers would like. Supply chain bottlenecks are causing the cost of goods to skyrocket, and everything from Halloween costumes to that Thanksgiving turkey has gotten harder to find. We'll get into what that means, and we want to hear from you. How is inflation hitting your pocketbook? Email us at 1a@wamu.org or tweet us at 1a.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. President Biden is in Scotland today. He's preparing to speak to the UN Climate Summit in Glasgow. NPR's Frank Langfitt is there.
Many analysts are skeptical countries can reduce the growth in carbon emissions fast enough to avoid the catastrophic effects of climate change. At the Paris climate talks in 2015, countries pledged to work to prevent temperatures from rising above 1.5 degrees Celsius. Ahead of the 2021 summit, British Prime Minister and host Boris Johnson, who's being criticized for failing to stop plans to open a coal mine in England, warned, quote, "If Glasgow fails, then the whole thing fails."
NPR's Frank Langfitt reporting. The presidents of China and Russia, Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin, are not attending the talks in Glasgow. The Kremlin says Putin does intend to deliver a recorded message to the summit. Advisors to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention will meet tomorrow to weigh in on recommendations for COVID-19 vaccines for children aged 5 to 11 years old. NPR's Allison Aubrey reports the CDC's green light would mean younger kids could get shots within a matter of days.
The FDA authorized the use of Pfizer's lower-dose vaccine in children ages 5 to 11 on Friday. Now the CDC will weigh in later this week as pediatricians prepare to offer the shot. Dr. Nicole Baldwin practices in Cincinnati.
Right now, we're anticipating, hopefully, being able to start vaccinating those kids ages 5 to 11 starting sometime the second week in November.
Each state is distributing vaccines a bit differently. In Maryland, some pediatricians say retail pharmacies, such as CVS, may have the vaccine before they do. Pediatricians say getting kids vaccinated before the holidays could help make family gatherings safer. Allison Aubrey, NPR News.
Stocks open mixed this morning, adding to the record highs reached at the end of last week. NPR's Scott Horsley reports the Dow Jones Industrial Average rose about 70 points in early trading.
Asian stocks were mostly higher overnight, with Japan's Nikkei average climbing more than 2.5% after a stronger than expected showing by Japan's ruling Liberal Democrats in weekend elections. China's manufacturing sector shrank in October for the second month in a row. That's in contrast to U.S. factories, which have seen growing orders and production, although manufacturers in the U.S. have struggled to get parts and workers they need to keep pace with strong demand. Rising prices are in the spotlight as policymakers from the Federal Reserve prepare to meet this week. The Fed's preferred measure of inflation showed prices in September were up 4.4% from a year ago. That's the sharpest increase in 3 decades. Scott Horsley, NPR News, Washington.
On Wall Street, stocks remain mixed this hour. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is up about 73 points at 35,892. The Nasdaq is down about 14. You're listening to NPR News.
This is WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville, 10:04 now. The Jacksonville City Council was divided on accepting pay raises after a recent change that requires them to declare publicly whether they're taking or rejecting increases in pay. Our news partner, the Florida Times-Union, reports 11 council members turned down the $600 salary increase, while 7, including Council President Sam Newby, accepted it. Newby's salary, the highest on the council, is more than $70,000 for the part-time job. Military installations across Central Florida are economically important to local communities. As environmental reporter Amy Green reports, climate change poses a growing threat, and there are concerns about how those military installations will be impacted.
Rising seas threaten infrastructure while warming temperatures pressure outdoor productivity. This affects communities where military installations are a vital part of the economy. Dale Catcham of Space Florida says the Space Coast is uniquely vulnerable as home to the Kennedy Space Center, a crucial gateway for government and commercial spaceflight.
If you look down, if you take, satellite imagery, you can see the ocean is dramatically encroaching on Launch Complex 46. And so we have to go through a lot of exercises to figure out how do we protect that.
The Biden administration released several reports last week on climate change and national security. The United Nations Climate Conference, COP26, got underway over the weekend. Amy Green in Orlando.
Temperatures in the mid-70s today.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Capital One, offering Capital One Shopping, a downloadable browser extension that searches various sites for shoppers. What's in your wallet? More at CapitalOneShopping.com. And the Annie E. Casey Foundation.
What's Jacksonville Today?
Jacksonville Today is growing.
Chaotic.
Creative. Jacksonville Today is hopeful.
Get the Jacksonville Today newsletter with the top local stories of the day, plus exclusive columns, a heads up on getting involved in local decision making, and the best of what's weird and wonderful in Northeast Florida. The Jacksonville Today newsletter. Sign up now at jaxtoday.org. That's jaxtoday.org.
This is 1A. I'm Jen White in Washington. Prices are going up, and economists say they probably won't come down for a while.
I was recently shopping, and the salmon that I buy, the frozen salmon, went up $6.50 in 1 month. I almost had a heart attack. I also noticed a huge jump in other things, and of course my gas has gone up about 50 cents in the last month, so I'm driving less.
And that's not all. The cost of shipping has gone up, deliveries are running behind, and items are out of stock indefinitely. Halloween costume shoppers were in a pinch over the weekend, and the fast approaching holiday season is only going to put more stress on a supply chain that's already breaking down. This time hasn't just been rough for consumers, but for workers and small business owners who are wrestling with the supply chain crisis directly. One of those small business owners joins us now. Michelle Smith is the owner of Brewed Downtown. That's a cafe based in Jacksonville, North Carolina. Michelle, it's great to have you.
Thank you for having me.
So let's go back to when the pandemic first began. Restaurants like your own were hit especially hard by COVID. How did you adapt?
Well, we're lucky enough that I had the forethought 9 years ago to put in a drive-through window. So we just kind of adapted. We had more that were coming through the drive-through for pickup, but we're also in a military town, so it was kind of a forced. Nobody could get out, nobody could do anything. So we just we adapted. We did the best that we could do.
And so when you moved to more of that takeout model, how did that change how you were operating as a business?
We had to order a ton more to-go supplies, the cups, the to-go boxes, silver, the plasticware, just all of that, like doubled my my regular order. We have a small dine-in area, and it really hurt. It hurt my seniors that were coming in that were pretty regular, and they couldn't even eat outside. They couldn't do anything. So it was rough on us in the beginning.
And how did you go about letting your customers know that, hey, we're still here, we're changing our model a little bit, but we're still available to you?
I used social media as much as I could. I posted a couple of videos, some fun things, and it kind of got the attention. I have a pretty steady customer base. The military is about 90% of my business, and they were pretty much told that they couldn't go out in the community at all. So I kind of lost that, but retained a lot of my regular customers and then gained some new ones because everybody was just tired of being at home.
So you were able to maintain for a while, but when did you realize your business was really reaching a crisis point?
When I could no longer get my to-go products that I needed, I started offering incentives, bring your own cup, I'll give you 10% off. We could get lids, we could get cups, but we couldn't get the lids to match. They were shrinking our amount that we could order, that we could get, including food, milk, eggs, all of that. The strain of that and the stress of that was more unbearable than anything else that we had.
And when you say they were shrinking the amount you could order, can you explain that a little bit more?
Well, the cases, typically my cases come 500 pieces to a case. And I was ordering about 4,000 to accommodate. I probably see about 350 customers a day. So having that translate to things that we could put and wash and put away, everything was 100% to go. So I was quickly running out of cases, and they were only allowing me to buy one case of anything. And we were just ordering weekly to get delivery. We're deep coast, North Carolina, almost just above South Carolina. So our delivery area is small but large, and they were limiting everybody.
Now, I think for many of us, the idea of a supply chain seems, pretty pretty distant. All of us know that something is out of stock or the price of an item has gone up. We know that experience. But as a business owner, explain what happens on your end. You're trying to order supplies you need. You're trying to order food for the restaurant, but suddenly that availability is gone. How do you adapt, or try to adapt at least?
Well, we were told, I've been in business for 9 years. I've used the same suppliers the entire time. Midway through October last year, about this time last year, I started noticing that what I was normally getting, I couldn't get at all. And sometimes this happens around the holidays, so I didn't think too much about it, just like on ham and turkey, some lunch meat things that we serve on our sandwiches. And I usually order heavy in October in anticipation of Thanksgiving turkeys and hams for Christmas, that kind of stuff. So I usually order heavy, and they were severely limiting what we had. What we were normally getting, they were substituting with, in my summation, a lesser quality, and it just wouldn't do. Then in August, the first part of August, my giant food supplier said, all right, well, we're having a problem here. We can no longer service you. And this is coming from my sales rep. And I said, well, what's going on? Why are you not going to service me? I pay my bills. I have a weekly supply. We're ordering 52 weeks a year. I don't understand. I've been with you 9 years. Why are you quitting me? And he said, well, the company as a whole decided that they were going to concentrate on their larger companies. And by no means do I see myself as a large business. I'm actually a very small business. But it hurt. 9 years. You're with these people for 9 years. They said, yeah, we're sorry, but you have the availability to go to Sam's Club. You have the ability to go to the grocery stores, the Walmarts, the Costco's, all within your area. And I said, well, that's all good and well, but like every large company, you buy products from another, like let's just use macaroni and cheese. Macaroni and cheese, you can get the big label macaroni and cheese, but you can get Walmart brand macaroni and cheese, which is made by the big label. And so we were used to that, like there are products that were just branded for the food provider.
So what does that mean for your bottom line when you're told we can't service you anymore? You need to basically go out and do some grocery shopping for your restaurant.
Well, as a business, we buy tax exempt because we're turning around and collecting sales tax upon the sale to my customers. But I still have to go to Walmart. I have to pay tax at Walmart. I have to pay tax at the other grocery stores. The only place I'm tax exempt at is Costco and Sam's Club. I can't get everything I need at both of those places. So trying to supplement, so I'm assuming Walmart's paying their sales tax. I'm collecting sales tax. I'm turning it over to the state for sales tax. So they're kind of getting a double edge on both ends. They're benefiting, we're not.
So what has that meant for your business as of late? Have you been able to find a new vendor, or are you just making do?
We have been trying to make do. I had another smaller company, but even they're being hit by the, the actual, they don't have it. The availability just isn't there. We're responsible for ordering 22 pieces or 22 cases. And if I can't meet that 22, then they won't deliver.
I know for a while you worked with other restaurants to try to combine your orders to meet some of these minimums the companies were requiring you to order, but you ran into some logistical issues with that, storage issues with that. What are you hearing from other restaurants in your community about what the path ahead looks like for them?
Well, we're all struggling. I've had 5 small businesses around here all closed down. Couple of restaurants. There's 2 restaurants that are currently for sale right now. I tried really hard to bring the community together to see, hey, I can get this from this person. Can you get this? Can you trade? Do you have any extra straws? I waited 16 weeks for straws. we were all just kind of begging and borrowing, and I can probably get it on my truck for next week, because we're all using different vendors, depending on whether or not they're seafood, whether or not they're a steakhouse, whether or not they're like me, I serve a little of a lot of stuff, and we couldn't get it. I have a guy who does smoked barbecue, and he services a lot of restaurants, and he was used to getting big, hunks of Boston butts and, things like that. And we tried for a while getting them all delivered on one truck. So we're looking at, my orders were about $1,500. By adding all of my other friends and small restaurants into their orders, we're looking at about $6,500, $7,000 a week. Then they said, no, you can't do that. You can't share orders. We can't split them. You each can't get an invoice. I said, well, I don't care. I'm paying you. Everybody is paying you. So if we wanted to go back on it, we could, and we could say, well, this is what it was, but we're paying you direct. So invoicing wasn't the issue.
Michelle, very briefly, what would you like to see from the administration to support businesses like your own? You've said you don't feel like President Biden has really addressed the issues facing small businesses.
He really hasn't, and I don't think the impact, people who have money, it doesn't impact them. But for those of us who are working hard for our money, it's a different issue.
Is there a specific thing you'd like to see?
I'd like to see making everybody get back to work, opening up jobs and making them actually do it, requiring the vaccinations or, I don't know what it is. I think everybody's just used to that stimulus money and nobody really wants to work for it.
That's Michelle Smith. She's the owner of Brewed Downtown. That's a cafe based in Jacksonville, North Carolina. Michelle, thanks so much for speaking with us.
Thanks, Jen.
One of you wrote this: many items are in smaller packages, such as the box of cake mix we get, and there's just an overall shortage of items at the grocery store. I've always shopped for bargains and sales. Now I'm looking for them more than ever. We'll continue our conversation about inflation and the supply chain crisis in a moment. I'm Jen White. This is 1A.
Preparing for the next pandemic, because there is going to be one, is going to take a lot more than just stocking up on masks and gloves,
When we think about the next contagion, we should be thinking about how to fix these underlying structures.
I'm Kai Rizdal. What sort of structures do you suppose? We'll tell you next time on Marketplace.
Tonight at 6, here on WJCT News 89.9.
The biggest hits in music are often the result of a perfect pairing.
It's really like the crux of hip-hop culture. You go back to the beginning when you had DJs and MCs rocking the park jams.
The Formula, a series by NPR Music and Video, explores producer-artist collaborations. That story this afternoon on All Things Considered from NPR News.
Starting at 4 on WJCT News 89.9.
I'm Marco Werman. We're living through history, and the world's newsroom has the first draft.
We are still on track for climate catastrophe, even with the last announcements that were made.
Looking for answers and making sense of global events as they happen.
We all have our fingers crossed that when Biden takes the stage in Glasgow, that he's got something to show for it.
Join us on The World.
This afternoon at 3, here on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from your part-time controller specializing in nonprofit accounting. Your part-time controller helps nonprofit organizations with their accounting needs, remotely or in person. More at yourparttimecontroller.com. From Athena Health, creating connected healthcare technology designed to improve patient outcomes and increase efficiency of healthcare practices and organizations. Learn more at athenahealth.com. And from the listeners who support this NPR station.
I'm Jen White. This is 1A. We're discussing inflation and the supply chain crisis, and let's add two new voices into the conversation. Julie Coronado is the president and founder of Macro Policy Perspectives. That's an independent economic research service provider. She's also an associate professor of finance at the McCombs School of Business at the University of Texas at Austin. Julia, welcome to the program.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Also with us is Scott Horsley. He's the chief economics correspondent for NPR. Scott, it's great to have you.
Good to be with you, Jen.
Now, you were both listening along as we were talking to Michelle Smith. She's the owner of a small business in Jacksonville, North Carolina. Scott, what stood out to what you heard from her there?
Well, it's a very familiar story. I've talked to a lot of business owners around the country, and I hear similar tales from all of them. When the supply chain is stretched, it's the small fry that feel it the most. You know, the biggest players can afford to charter their own cargo ships or employ their own truck drivers. But the smaller businesses that rely on vendors to do all those chores for them, they're the first ones to feel the pain when either people or parts run short.
Well, Julia, we also heard from Michelle. She said, people just need to get back to work. But is that core to the issue we're seeing right now with inflation?
Well, what we are seeing is a very intense competition for the kinds of workers that used to work in restaurants. So sort of entry-level, lower-wage workers. When we went into the pandemic, everybody stopped spending money at restaurants, but they started ordering things online. And so Amazon has begun to really staff up and build out its workforce. And it has become a main source of competition for restaurants. And so we're seeing higher wage rates, higher benefits, and workers have a bit more bargaining power. And you can hear that in her frustration that the labor force is different post-pandemic than it was pre-pandemic. That's in many senses good for the workers, but it's a challenging environment for small business owners who were thinking that they were going to go back to how they used to do things. Now they have to change how they do things.
Scott, we also heard Michelle reference stimulus money. Is it clear what kind of impact that's had on the economy and people's willingness to return to work?
No, it's really not clear. I think there was an expectation among a lot of observers that we would see stronger return of workers in September after the expanded unemployment benefits expired nationwide, but we really didn't see a whole lot of folks coming back into the workforce at that time. And earlier in the summer, we'd seen about half the states which had phased out those benefits ahead of schedule, and they didn't see a real bump in people going back to work either. So I think although a lot of people assumed that those expanded unemployment benefits were keeping people on the sidelines, they were just one factor in many. And of course, this has all been complicated by the Delta wave, which made people maybe more nervous about going back to work, or maybe they were home taking care of somebody who was sick. With the reopening of schools, also, we thought we'd see more working parents back in the workforce, but that hasn't really happened yet.
Well, we got this tweet from one of you who says, your small business anecdote misses that she can recover her overpaid sales tax during North Carolina filing and exemplifies the need for supply chain diversity, which is a lot of work. We'll get into that supply chain question in a moment. But Julia, I think first, a lot of us who are consumers mostly understand inflation to mean rising prices, but Harley asks, can you explain the difference between inflation and higher prices? And will this mean higher bank interest for our savings? So let's start with the first part of that. What's the difference between inflation and just prices going up?
Well, they are very related. So prices going up is that's something that can happen when say the input cost of something goes up, say energy prices or food prices, they go up and they go down depending on the dynamics of the industry. Inflation is a process of prices increasing year after year after year on a very broad basis. So not just one price of an item going up because of that industry's dynamics, but all prices going up repeatedly year after year after year. That's inflation, and that's something we haven't seen in a very long time. We've tended to see more a mix of prices going up and down depending on dynamics, and overall the level of inflation remaining pretty subdued. We have seen a broader base of price increases, although it's still not clear how much of this is tied to reopening, tied to some of these supply chain challenges that we do think will get resolved over time, and how much of this is creeping into a process of inflation that we're going to be facing year after year. That's sort of the open question and debate and the challenge for the Federal Reserve in setting interest rates. So to the question of whether this will lead to higher interest rates, it hasn't led to higher longer-term interest rates yet. Mortgage rates are still low, 10-year bond yields are still very low, and the interest rate you're earning on any kind of a deposit account remains pretty low. So right now, financial markets are saying what we're seeing is a big burst of price increases that won't repeat year after year after year. And so interest rates are expected to stay low. That could be wrong, but that's currently what the financial markets are saying.
Another of you shared this. Building materials are in very short supply and have doubled, even quadrupled in price. Construction labor has been in short supply and has also increased in price as a result. This makes home remodeling and construction difficult and much more expensive. Meat and eggs have increased in price, and of course, gasoline has gone up $1.25 per gallon or more, which has in turn increased the cost of transporting and delivering food and other things. Julia, what's behind the inflation we're experiencing right now?
Well, there's a lot of things. So one is that the things that we buy changed pretty radically during the pandemic. Instead of going on vacations and entertaining ourselves and going out to restaurants, we are buying homes, we are buying goods. Most of this is imported. A lot of these materials are imported, and so you get this crunch in supply chains. It's not that that supply chains aren't functioning. It's just they're being stretched to capacity by the demand because all of a sudden we want goods. So that's led to some bottlenecks and some challenges. In the building materials industry, it's interesting because in the case of lumber, we also saw that early in the pandemic, lumber prices soaring. They have since come down because mills started ramping up production, and we import a lot of that from Canada. And so the supply chains and the transportation isn't as complex as, say, bringing in things from Asia. So that gets to the idea that over time, these supply chains will work themselves out and some of those prices will come down. On the labor side, that shortage of construction workers was with us pre-pandemic. And some of that is tied to, we saw immigration, rates of immigration slow because of policy before the pandemic. And that, you have to keep in mind, immigration has been the main source of population growth in the United States for decades. So we slowed it down. That means less workers. That's an industry heavily employed, that it heavily employs immigrants. And then during the pandemic, it really, really shut down for health reasons. So some visas, just work visas, weren't being issued, and immigration from certain countries was simply banned. So, we're facing a labor shortage in part because we've shut down the key area of population growth. And that leads to, shortages and higher wages in those industries.
Scott, zoom out for us a bit, because we're talking about how we're experiencing the supply chain breakdown and inflation here in the U.S., but there is a breakdown in the global supply chain, and Julia alluded to that. Explain a little bit about what we're seeing globally.
Well, I think the point that Julia makes is really important to keep in mind. We are bringing in more stuff than ever, even though people may see spot shortages here and there. It's not because we're generally speaking not bringing in a lot of stuff. It's that we're bringing in more than we ever have, and we're trying to squeeze 6 lanes of traffic through 4 lanes of road, and that's strained every link in the supply chain. But we do expect to see some of that spending shift back to services as people feel, more comfortable going out and eating, going out to live entertainment, traveling more. We began to see some of that shift from goods to services in the September spending numbers that came out last Friday. Not entirely. It's not back to normal by any means. We're still spending less than normal on services and more than normal on goods. But we do expect that to reverse, but it's taking longer than I think a lot of forecasters thought we'd see. And again, part of that's tied to the Delta surge we had in late summer and early fall.
Well, Milton writes, the supply chain breakdown was very foreseeable, but nobody bothered to make plans to minimize it. And Robert writes, of course, Trumpers are blaming Biden when it's mainly due to COVID and the former president's super slow response to it. Scott, first of all, how much of an impact does the president actually have on the economy, even outside of a pandemic?
Well, the presidents always get more credit and more blame for economic conditions than they probably deserve. Obviously, COVID was an enormous economic as well as public health event, and we're still dealing with the consequences of it. And we can argue about how the previous administration and how the current administration have tackled that pandemic. But clearly that has disrupted the normal flow of goods around the world. It's affected the production of goods in Asia. It's affected the transportation of goods across oceans. It's affected even the transportation of goods that are produced right here in the United States, just because that anything has to go by truck, which is just about everything, is dealing with a trucking shortage or congested railways or whatnot. And a lot of that does come back to labor. It comes back to not enough workers. I do think this is being strained by really strong demand too. It's not that we're not producing as much as we usually do. It's that we're demanding more than we typically do.
We got this question from Andrea, who asks, is there any connection between the present economic picture and Trump's tariff policies? Julia? I think we're having a little trouble with Julia's line, so we'll come back to her. We're hearing from lots of you about how you're being affected by inflation. Tim writes, not only has our family experienced the rising costs of groceries and clothing, but also utilities and gasoline. Given the economic uncertainties, we've taken to shopping more frequently at dollar stores and thrift stores to find the things we need and are eating out less often. And Heather emails, my husband's 2016 GMC pickup truck has been out of commission for 4 weeks due to a faulty transmission. The issue is covered by the warranty, but the dealership can't give us a time frame on when the part will arrive. They just keep telling us it's on back order. We're talking to Julie Coronado. She's the president and founder of Macro Policy Perspectives. That's an independent economic research service provider. Also with us, Scott Horsley. He's chief economics correspondent for NPR. And we also want to hear from you. What changes have you noticed in what things cost where you live? If you're on the business side of things, have you had trouble hiring workers, or have you been affected by slowdowns in the supply chain? You can share your thoughts on our Facebook page, tweet us at 1A, or send us an email at 1A@WAMU.org. Julia, I want to return to Andrea's question, who asked, is there any connection between the present economic picture and Trump's tariff policies? Your thoughts?
So I would say that we were in a trade war before COVID, and that was causing some rearrangement in global supply chains, some changes in prices. Some of those tariffs led to more expensive appliances and other imported materials. So there was some of what we're seeing is a continuation of that. And I think more broadly, what we are seeing is that even amidst all of this sort of bottleneck and supply chain disruption from the pandemic and the demand shift, we are seeing a sort of longer term geopolitical shift between a sort of truly globalized supply chain and one that becomes more polarized with a China-centric supply chain and a U.S., European, and allied associated supply chain. So we are seeing some structural moves in supply chains. Of course, COVID also led us to realize some of the vulnerabilities in supply chains that we just weren't aware of as acutely before. So yes, some of those pre-pandemic trends do play into some of the supply chain disruption that we're seeing, some of which is tied to COVID and some of which is more structural.
Now, Scott, President Biden and House Democrats are hoping to get a $1.75 trillion spending bill and a $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill passed as early as tomorrow. How has the current economic climate complicated support for Biden's economic agenda?
Well, the Republicans have criticized these spending bills as pouring gas on the fire. They've suggested at a time when we have high inflation that having the government spend more money will make things worse. Democrats counter that by saying, especially in terms of the infrastructure bill, that this is a decade-long spending. So the amount of money that's coming out in any given year is not that great. But certainly the spending that was done earlier in the pandemic, both by the current administration and under the previous administration, did leave a lot of money in people's pockets, especially relative to what was going on in the economy with unemployment near 15% at the peak, people actually still had a lot of money, and that's one reason spending has held up so well, and it's one reason that the supply chain has been as stretched as it has, and all that's playing into this jump in prices that we've been seeing.
Well, here's Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen speaking to CNBC News last Friday about those two bills.
The infrastructure and Build Back Better packages are spending that's really small relative to the economy in any year and spread over 10 years. And as I said, it will boost the economy's potential to grow, the economy's supply potential, which tends to push inflation down, not up.
Julia, what's your response to Secretary Yellen's argument that these bills may actually help address inflation?
Well, I am in agreement with Secretary Yellen. Some of the things in the bills are support for parents, universal pre-K, child tax care credits, some subsidies for child care workers. These are the kinds of things that make it easier for people to go to work. So to your earlier guest, the restaurant owner who wanted people to get back to work, childcare has been a big challenge. Schools have been, slow to reopen, a lot of online remote learning, and the daycare industry, the childcare industry is still well below pre-COVID levels and has been just super challenged by the pandemic. So I think supporting parents and working parents is something that could unlock labor supply and help the economy's growth potential. So I would agree with her.
Well, in recent weeks, we did a show on the shortage in childcare workers, and you can find that conversation at the1a.org. We'll also tweet out a link at 1A. We're hearing from lots of you. BS Hound tweets, my dairy farmer friend can't get parts to repair broken equipment, and his production is stressed and his income is depressed as a result. And Amy tweets, our large apartment complex raised our rent 35%. This is a large property management company. I don't know anyone whose income has raised 35% this year. We're discussing inflation and the supply chain crisis with Julie Coronado. She's the president and founder of Macro Policy Perspectives. That's an independent economic research service provider. And we'll be back with more from her and Scott Horsley, chief economics correspondent for NPR, in just a moment. I'm Jen White. This is 1A.
I'm Robin Young. The Broadway show Tina tells the Tina Turner story from abuse survivor to superstar. And soon, 25-year-old Nkeki Obi-Melekwe will take over the role.
For the first time the other day, I was like, someone hit her. What if somebody hit me? I feel like it's just breaks me open and I get really emotional.
Next time, Here and Now.
Today at 1 on WJCT News 89.9.
On the next Fresh Air, filmmaker Edgar Wright. His movies include Baby Driver and Shaun of the Dead. His newest is a thriller called Last Night in Soho. It's about a young woman who is transported in her dreams into the swinging 60s of London, where she lives out the life of another woman. At first thrilling, the dreams become nightmares that haunt her waking hours. Join us.
Today at noon on WJCT News 89.9.
Carol in upstate New York is one of many who's done with our clocks falling back and springing forward.
I think it's unnecessary. We're not truly an agricultural society. I just think it would make life a lot easier if we didn't have to deal with that anymore.
Now lawmakers are pushing to make daylight saving time permanent. A bright idea or one that leaves too many in the dark. Next time on 1A.
Today at 11 on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from DuckDuckGo, a privacy company committed to making privacy online simple. Used by tens of millions, they offer private search and tracker blocking with one download. DuckDuckGo, privacy simplified. From Newsy, with a mission to bring viewers essential journalism that is relevant and rooted in fact, not opinion. A 24/7 news network available by using a TV antenna or streaming device. At newsy.com, and from the Lemelson Foundation.
Let's get back to our conversation about inflation and the supply chain crisis with Julia Coronado. She's the president and founder of Macro Policy Perspectives. That's an independent economic research service provider. Also with us, Scott Horsley. He's chief economics correspondent for NPR. And here's a message we got from Lindsay in Virginia.
I work in the theatrical and film lighting industry, and what I've seen and what my colleagues have seen across the entertainment industry is that a lot of people during the pandemic have pivoted away from backstage work and moved on to other industries or have gone back to school. So it's been very hard to fill positions.
We also heard from Ernie, who tweets, I own a private bus company, and I have been driving 60% of all our contracts. All my drivers have not returned and most likely won't. Scott, according to the Labor Department, between July and September, wages increased more than they have in 20 years. At the same time, we're also seeing more and more workers demanding better conditions and treatment across industries. How do you think this general shift towards higher expectations around the quality of work impact the future of labor and things like labor shortages?
Well, as Julia said earlier, workers are feeling more bargaining power than I think they felt in a long time, and it is encouraging to see those wage gains. Unfortunately, for the average worker, the wage gains are not keeping pace with inflation. I think the third quarter wage gains were 4.2%, and inflation in September was 4.4%. So they're actually losing spending power in real terms. But a lot of the wage gains have been in lower wage industries like restaurants and bars and hotels, and workers in those categories have seen a larger increase, up around 9%. And that's really encouraging. But it's good to see people on the bottom rungs of the ladder, move up a few notches. But even with those higher wages, employers say they're having trouble getting the workers they need. And I think that speaks to a larger sort of rethinking in the population about what they want out of jobs, what they're willing to do, the kinds of conditions they want. And we're all going to have to reckon with that. I've talked to lots of employers who recognize that as well and say we need to do a better job of making work that's attractive to people. And as Julia said, too, part of it is dealing with big structural things like childcare, which this country is pretty weak in.
Julie, I'd love to hear from you on this as well. We've had several conversations on this show about the changing nature of work during the pandemic. What are your thoughts?
Well, so I agree with Scott that there's a lot of sort of pandemic-specific factors that are getting in the way of some people returning to the workforce. In addition, the research shows that usually in a business cycle, we come out of a recession, and the first thing that happens is the unemployed people, the people actively looking for jobs, get reemployed first. And then some of the people that gave up looking, that left the labor force altogether, start coming back after that. So we're sort of getting to the point, especially then you factor in the pandemic-related complications, where we might start to see people coming back. Wages are rising, opportunities are there, people might be solving the problems that came with the pandemic, and people that left may start to come back, and that will alleviate some of the shortages that we're seeing. Now, certain industries like trucking, again, they were challenged before the pandemic and things only got more challenging. And there you might have to see more restructuring of the industry, like Scott alluded to. You're going to have to see, when we track companies' earnings reports, for example, we see companies responding to these tight labor markets or these labor shortages by doing things not just like raising wages, but also changing work schedules, changing work arrangements to meet the needs of workers, allowing hybrid work arrangements, giving more regular schedules in the restaurant industry, which were not typical, things that make people's lives easier. They've got a little bit more bargaining power in this strong recovery. And so employers have to kind of meet those demands to stay competitive. So we might see some restructuring in some of these business models. Trucking is an industry that was characterized by very precarious working conditions for a lot of the non-unionized truckers. They were expected to absorb the ebbs and flows of business and in their own take-home pay. And that's a lot to ask. That's a lot of uncertainty and volatility for most people to manage. So We may see some restructuring in these industries in how employers engage with workers and the kinds of contracts and conditions that are common, and that might need to happen to bring workers into the needed workers into the industry.
We also got this question from Carol, who asks, are there any statistics on how many members of the workforce were part of those lost to COVID-related deaths? And we should note here that according to the CDC, over 743,000 people in the U.S. have died of COVID. Scott, do we know that?
I've not seen, an actual number of this many people who were working, say, in February of 2020 have succumbed. Obviously, a lot of the people who died were older, so probably out of their prime working years. But there's no question some of those 700,000+ people who died were working. More, I think, are people who are have either gotten sick. They've stayed home to avoid getting sick, and in many cases, they're staying home to look after others who are sick.
Well, I want to return to this question we got about rent. We heard from Amy before the break, who talked about rent jumping 35% at her complex. We also got this message from a member of the 1A Text Club who says rent is going up fast. Renting a house today is hundreds of dollars more than renting the same house a year or two ago. But is this increase considered inflation? It seems some things such as rent are increasing faster than inflation alone would account for. Julia, what do you think?
Yeah, that's a great example of how inflation can sort of sow the seeds of its own destruction, right? If rents are going up 35% and your listener noted that people's incomes aren't going up 35%, even with solid wage gains, they're not 35%. And so that will mean that you're going to have to spend less money on other things, right? So it can actually, high inflation, a jump in prices, not inflation, but a jump in prices can slow demand. It can hit the pace of the recovery. That's what we typically think of when we think of energy prices. If gasoline prices spike, you have less money in your pocket to spend on other things, and that can slow the economy down. So that's a real question with this burst of inflation that we're seeing, particularly with rents. It's a strain on people's pocketbooks. Will that slow down the recovery over the next, say, 3 to 6 months? And therefore, as demand slows, so does pricing power, and some of those prices might have to come back down. So we could do a round trip on some of those prices, depending on how high they go. But yes, and the other side of that, though, that I would want to add is that building is responding. So we saw a gigantic wave of COVID migrations, people moving from typically high-cost, dense coastal areas to lower-cost cities, and the Sun Belt was a big part of the migration. And so you see rents jumping in those areas because supply couldn't keep up. But now we're seeing really strong building rates. Of course, that's challenged by the supply chain issues, but over time, we would expect in a lot of these Sunbelt cities, lots of apartments and homes to be built to meet this new demand. And again, that should cool off prices. So there's a number of ways in which this very intense burst of prices in certain sectors can cool off down the road just because they're going too far too fast.
We're talking to Julia Coronado. She's the president and founder of Macro Policy Perspectives. That's an independent economic research service provider. Also with us is Scott Horsley. He's a chief economics correspondent for NPR. We're also hearing from you. Dev writes, I own a small diner in North Florida, and every week my food order goes up. We are paying $4,000 or $5,000 more for lesser quality goods that may or may not show up. Now, Julia, the holidays are coming up, which means many of these issues with the supply chain are likely to be exacerbated. What are your biggest concerns as we head into the holidays?
Yeah, well, we could start to see, we could see shortages in some of the key areas that are the center of holiday shopping, like toys and clothing that are imported, and therefore seeing the supply chain disruptions and bottlenecks and higher shipping costs. So consumers are going to have to choose how to respond to that. Should you maybe shift your spending and buy more services, gift certificates to local restaurants, gift certificates to events is one way to respond to some of these shortages. The shortages aren't, again, going to last forever because these companies are incentivized to solve these problems and sell their product. But in the near term, it might not get fixed so quickly. That could mean higher prices and a decision for consumers on exactly, how to do their holiday shopping. And maybe it justifies a little bit of a shift in the way you think about your holiday shopping.
Well, and I'm wondering if this could be a moment for us to take a look at our buying habits through a more existential lens. We got this tweet from Jared who says, abolish terms like labor shortage, supply chain issues, labor costs, and other capitalistic euphemisms that obscure businesses' desires to exploit human beings and the environment without consequence. I mean, is this also a question about the sustainability of how we buy and purchase and produce and move goods around the world right now?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That is a very fair point. We have sort of taken this global goods supply chain, this import machine that's kept goods prices very low. We've sort of taken that for granted and gotten very accustomed to it. But there are unintended consequences, for the environment, for labor, for just the allocation of activity within and outside our borders, the vulnerabilities during a pandemic. So I think we are learning a lot of more existential things from this episode, and we should maybe take those into consideration as we move forward from the pandemic, rather than just seeking to go back to some pre-pandemic structure of the economy. There's never any going back. My least favorite word in the lexicon on the economy is normal, like going back to normal. There's never any, we're always evolving and changing the structure of the economy, and hopefully we learn from things that challenge us and make things better as we move forward to the next phase of the economy.
We got this message from Christopher who says it's going to get a lot worse. Switching to green energy is going to be a lot more expensive. This is not a commentary on if we should go green. Obviously, we have to. I'm just saying the idea this will happen painlessly with no major changes in our lives is a pipe dream. Scott, how is this current economic situation and inflation and rising gas prices, do you see it converging with conversations around climate change policy?
Yes, and sometimes in sort of contradictory ways. President Biden, on his way to the COP20 meeting in Scotland, was asked about his own agitating for OPEC and Russia to increase their oil production more quickly than they've been doing, and whether that was contradictory. To, on the one hand, be urging strong action to limit the damage from climate change, while at the same time urging fossil fuel producers to step up production to try to keep a lid on gasoline prices. And Joe Biden said just yesterday, the idea that we're not going to need gasoline for automobiles is not realistic. It has a profound impact on working class families just to get back and forth to work. So I don't see anything inconsistent with that, the president said. Certainly the White House, which has been pretty aggressive in pushing for measures to deal with climate change, is also acutely aware of gasoline prices. Gasoline prices have a really outsized psychological effect on people, even more than the actual hit to their household budgets. And the White House is very sensitive to that. I will say, though, when we talk about how green energy might cost more, and in some cases that's not the case. Sometimes, some cases, green energy now costs less than traditional energy. But even if you say it costs more in nominal terms, you obviously have to factor in the enormous price that we're paying for a changing climate in terms of more destructive storms and wildfires and droughts and that sort of thing.
Well, at the G20 summit conference on Sunday, President Biden called on global leaders to address the problems with the supply chain. He also announced some domestic measures to tackle the issue. Scott, briefly, what were some of those measures?
Well, the supply chain, the White House likes to stress the supply chain is primarily run by the private sector. So there are things that the federal government can do around the edges. We saw the White House, for example, get involved in negotiating extended hours at the busy ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles. But ultimately, this is going to be a challenge for the private sector to deal with. The federal government can play a role in maybe improving information spread among say competing folks that are all bidding up demand for semiconductors or something. But the White House will want to look like they're doing something, but ultimately this is going to be a challenge for the private sector to address.
Well, we got this message from a member of the 1A Text Club who says, I still shop for the same groceries, just smaller amounts and more often so as not to waste any food. I realize the increased costs are mainly due to supply chain disruptions and anticipate it will balance out in a reasonable time frame. Juliet, do we have a sense of when we could see things get back under control? And is there anything people can do to better cope with what's likely to be several more months at least of high prices and supply chain chaos?
So in terms of timing, there's a lot of uncertainty, and it varies depending on what we're talking about. But I would say in general, nobody thinks it's going to get better between now and year end because we're in the holiday season. But starting in the first quarter of next year, that's when sort of on a seasonal basis, spending goes down, right? We take a breather. We spend into the holidays and then we naturally cool off at the beginning of the year. That could give shippers and supply chains some time to heal and catch their breath and restock inventories. So you could see a bit of relief in the first half of next year. The other factor is that COVID has been a disruptive force. Lower vaccination rates around the world meant factory disruptions when there were outbreaks, port shutdowns when there were outbreaks. As vaccination rates around the world climb, which they are doing quite nicely now, we should see fewer of those disruptions and smoother operations. And again, it's like a traffic jam. It's not going to clear up.
We're going to have to leave it there, leaving us with that image of the traffic jam that's probably not going to clear up very quickly. That's Julia Coronado, the president and founder of Macro Policy Perspectives. Also with us, Scott Horsley. He's a chief economics correspondent for NPR. Julia, Scott, thanks to you both. Today's producer was Haley Blassingame. This program comes to you from WAMU, part of American University in Washington, distributed by NPR. I'm Jen White. Thanks for listening, and let's talk more soon. This is 1A.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Athena Health, creating connected healthcare technology designed to improve patient outcomes and increase efficiency of healthcare practices and organizations. Learn more at athenahealth.com. From Searchlight Pictures, presenting The French Dispatch, a new film from Wes Anderson, starring Benicio del Toro, Adrian Brody, and Tilda Swinton, now playing in theaters everywhere. And from listeners like you who donate to this NPR station.
Hillary Clinton advisor Huma Abedin was used to working behind the scenes until fallout from the 2016 election pushed her into the spotlight. Now she's telling her own story in a new book. Both And explores the highs of Capitol Hill and the depths of scandal. Huma Abedin, next time on 1A.
Announcing Vickers Landing at Oak Bridge, bridging retirees with an all-new Ponte Vedra Beach community, featuring new homes, a resort lifestyle, and a life plan for every stage of aging. Information at vickerslanding.com.
Farah and Farah, dedicated to representing the injured people in Jacksonville for over 40 years. Learn more at farahandfarah.com or 396-5555. Farah and Farah's accident attorneys are here for you, here for good.
Florida Polytechnic University, nationally ranked in the top 30 public engineering colleges without a doctoral program by U.S. News and World Report. Programs in mechanical, electrical, cybersecurity, environmental, and computer engineering. floridapoly.edu.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Ahead in the next 5 minutes, live local news for the First Coast from the WJCT News team.
As the weather gets colder, it's almost time to fall back. But what if you never had to change your clock again? From WAMU and NPR in Washington, this is 1A. Hi, I'm Jen White. Today on 1A, daylight saving time. And yes, saving, not savings. We've pushed our clocks forward and backward for decades, and now some experts want to change that, citing everything from inconvenience to health reasons. As we gear up to move the clocks back again, we want to know what you think. Do you prefer standard time? Daylight saving? Maybe you think we should keep things as is. Let us know. Email us at 1a@wamu.org. Share your thoughts on our Facebook page or tweet us at 1a.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. The UN's climate summit, called COP26, has opened in Glasgow, Scotland. Several heads of state have made remarks. So did UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. He says leading world economies have made a lot of promises to cut carbon emissions. He says most of those promises are just illusions.
It's time to say enough. Enough of brutalizing biodiversity. Enough of killing ourselves with carbon. Enough of treating nature like a toilet. Enough of burning and drilling and mining our way deeper. We are digging our own graves.
President Biden has now taken the podium to speak to the climate summit. Jury selection starts today in the trial of 18-year-old Kyle Rittenhouse. He shot and killed 2 men in Kenosha, Wisconsin last year and wounded a third. His lawyers say it was self-defense and that he was part of a group defending businesses during protests following the police wounding of a black man. Prosecutors allege Rittenhouse crossed the state line and was looking to engage in violent conflict. Wisconsin Public Radio's Corinne Hess says the case has another controversial aspect.
So the judge in the case, Bruce Schrader, has made controversial decisions that some see as favoring the defense. Just last week, he got national attention for ruling that the men Rittenhouse shot can't be called victims during the hearing. But at the same time, he ruled that they can be referred to as rioters, looters, and arsonists.
Corinne Hess reporting. Prosecutors say there is no judicial finding that any of the people killed or wounded committed any criminal act that night. Democrats and Republicans in Virginia are making their final pitches to voters ahead of tomorrow's elections. Voters will select a new governor, as well as all 100 members of Virginia's State House. From member station VPM in Richmond, Ben Paviour reports polls are showing tight races.
Over 1 million Virginia voters have cast early ballots through the deadline this weekend, under extended voting rules passed by Democrats in the state legislature. The party is now defending that majority, as well as their hold on the governor's mansion in a race that's tightened over the last 2 months. Republican Glenn Youngkin and Democrat Terry McAuliffe will make final campaign stops in Richmond and Northern Virginia, where suburban voters could be decisive. Former President Donald Trump could wade into the race. He said he'll hold a virtual rally to gin up GOP enthusiasm in a state he lost by 10 points. Youngkin says he has no plans to attend. For NPR News, I'm Ben Paviour in Richmond.
On Wall Street, stocks are mixed. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is up 55 points at 35,874. The Nasdaq is up 30 points at 15,529. The S&P 500 is down 2. This is NPR.
The time is 4 minutes after 11. This is WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. An Orange County mother of 2 has been banned from her children's elementary school. She was told she's no longer welcome to volunteer there after another parent paid their way onto her page on an adults-only website featuring explicit photos and video. The 31-year-old mom makes her living posting images of herself on the subscription site. Her lawyers say they're preparing to sue the Orange County School District for $1 million for embarrassing their client and barring her from the school where she volunteered for 5 years. A large spider native to East Asia has spun its thick golden web on power lines, porches, and vegetable patches all over North Georgia this year. Researchers identified one of the Joro spiders near Atlanta about 7 years ago, but they say they don't know why their numbers have exploded this year, nor do they know exactly how the Joro got into the U.S. in the first place. The invasive spider can grow to 5 inches long and construct a web big enough and strong enough to capture a hummingbird. Although the spiders have also been found in South Carolina, Florida remains Joro-free. It is now 64 degrees here in downtown Jacksonville. The afternoon mostly sunny today, mid-70s with a light and variable wind, down to the low 60s tonight. And Tuesday and Wednesday mostly sunny with temperatures in the upper 70s. I'm Michelle Corum.
NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Your Part-Time Controller, specializing in nonprofit accounting. Your Part-Time Controller helps nonprofit organizations with their accounting needs, remotely or in person. More at yourparttimecontroller.com.
He's back. Ron Clark returns to teach on Saturday, November 13th at the Hyatt Regency Jacksonville. Expect a heartfelt, inspirational, table-standing presentation from Ron and learn from the best local educators at this day-long conference. Visit wjct.org/teach for additional details and to get your tickets now.
This is 1A. I'm Jen White in Washington. This weekend marks the end of daylight saving time, for this year anyway, but there's a bill in Congress to make it permanent. That would mean never changing our clocks again.
I hate daylight savings time. It messes me up. It messes up my sleep patterns. Every spring, every fall, I don't understand why we're still doing it. It makes absolutely no sense.
This is Sharon from Northern Virginia. We're already in daylight savings time 7 months out of the year. We ought to just stay in daylight savings time.
This is Grant in Ames, Iowa. Medical professionals emphasize how important it is to establish sleep routines. Daylight saving time disrupts that unnecessarily. We should change clocks 0 times each year.
Let's get a movement and get this stopped and give us consistent time throughout the year.
Thanks for those messages. 19 states have already made it clear that they'd make the switch if Congress says okay. But how did this biannual ritual come about anyway? And what are our other options? Joining us from Boston to talk about it is David Prerau. He's the author of Seize the Daylight, the curious and contentious story of daylight saving time. David, welcome to the program.
I'm glad to be here, Jen.
Also with us is Dr. Beth Mallow. She's the director of the Sleep Division at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. Dr. Mallow, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, and I just want to start with some definitions because I don't know about other people, but I always get super confused when we talk about daylight saving time. So currently, November to March is standard time. March to November is daylight saving time, and we're supposed to fall back at 2 a.m. this coming Sunday, November 7th, to return to standard time. So that's the lay of the land. But Dr. Mallow, changing the clock, is this twice-a-year ritual? How disruptive is it to our health?
Well, I think it varies person to person, but we know that light is really, really important. Light wakes us up, gives us energy, gets us going. Believe it or not, the light we get in the morning helps us fall asleep easier at night. So if it's dark when we wake up, and we're experiencing that now, many of us, at 7 in the morning, it's dark, it's going to interfere with our ability to get going and even to get the sleep we need at night to feel good and feel healthy the next day.
And we should mention here that standard time gives us more light in the mornings and less in the evening, while daylight saving time gives more light in the evening and less in the morning. And we asked you what you think of our time change tradition, and here's what Carol from New York told us.
I am just totally against the practice anymore. I think it's unnecessary. We're not truly an agricultural society. And I just think it would make life a lot easier if we didn't have to deal with that anymore.
Now, David, there's this popular idea that daylight saving time came from farmers, but is that true?
It is absolutely false, and it somehow became a myth that a lot of people believe. But in fact, from the very beginning of the real first proposal of daylight saving time in the British Parliament in 1908, to the present, where it's still being debated around the world, farmers have always been the leading group against daylight saving time, not for it.
So who came up with it in the first place?
Well, The actual concept goes way back to Benjamin Franklin. In 1784, he was our ambassador to France, and he used to go to these diplomatic events that would last all night and sleep late into the morning, into the noontime. And he realized one day when he woke up early and saw the sun shining that he could light his house for free with the sun. Instead, he had to pay for expensive and smoky candles to light his house in the evening. So he had the idea if people would wake up earlier, closer to sunrise, they could make better use of daylight. And that's the basic concept of daylight saving time, to move the clock in a way to make the best use of daylight.
Now, DST didn't gain popularity around the world until World War I and World War II. What happened to cause it to become more popular?
Well, what happened was that Benjamin Franklin didn't propose changing the clocks. But the first person to actually propose changing the clocks was a man named George Vernon Hudson in New Zealand in 1895, but nothing ever came from that. So the person who led to the daylight saving time we have today is a man named William Willett, who lived outside of London in the early 1900s. And he proposed it to Parliament. He used to wake up early every morning and go on an early morning horseback ride. And he would see everybody else was sleeping, and it was a beautiful spring and summer morning. And he said, we're wasting this daylight, and then when we get it home from work, we have 1 hour less, we have less daylight in the evening. So wouldn't it be nice to move some of this morning daylight to the evening where we could make better use of it? And he proposed it in 1908 to Parliament in Britain. They rejected it 1908, 1909, 1910, 1911, up to 1915 when he died. But then, and everybody thought it would stop, but then 1916 was the middle of World War I, and the Germans had heard of this British idea, and they decided to adopt it to save energy during World War I. Once the Germans adopted it, the British adopted it, and it wound up almost every country in World War I on both sides adopted daylight saving time for the war effort to save energy, and also for other reasons. It allowed people to do victory gardens, for example, when they came home from work at night. So it was used, and that was when it started in 1916 in Germany, and eventually spread around the world in World War I.
We're talking to David Prerau. He's the author of Seize the Daylight, the curious and contentious story of daylight saving time. Also with us is Dr. Beth Mallow. She's the director of the Sleep Division at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. We're also hearing from lots of you. Wayne emailed, I am in Indiana and find biannual time shifting disruptive and prefer standard time year-round. I keep some clocks on standard time and I pay attention to sunrise, sunset, expected sun exposure, temperature, and humidity at specific times, and am always converting between daylight and standard time in the summer. Dr. Mallow, what exactly does being on daylight saving time in the summer mean for the sunlight we get? Do we get more than we otherwise would?
We do. The way I look at it is when we're on daylight saving time, we're getting less light in the winter and more light in the summer, or I should say light earlier. We're getting our light in the summer later than we normally would. And that can be disruptive to sleep. Think about our phones. We're told to turn off our phones because they have that blue light in them, because we can interfere with sleep if we get too much of that blue light. Well, sunlight is blue light, lots of blue light. So when I lived in Michigan, it would be bright in the sky still. There'd still be light at 10 p.m. and people would have to do fireworks on July 4th, like 9:30, 10:30 to make sure it was dark. That's way too late for many people who are trying to get to sleep, especially if they have to get up early the next morning for work or school or something else.
Yeah, as a Michigander myself, I remember being called in to come in and from playing outside when there was still light. And I'm like, but it's still light outside. We should be able to stick around for a little bit. David, you mentioned that many countries use daylight saving time, but are they all synced up when they change back and forth, like we're moving on, this coming weekend? Is it standardized around the world?
No, it's not. Europe, most of the European countries standardized within Europe a while ago, but for a long time they each had each country different. But around the world, every country has different starting and ending days. And in fact, of course, you remember that we have daylight saving time in countries in the southern hemisphere. And so they have daylight saving time in our winter, their summer. So they certainly are out of sync with anything that we would have. Like Australia and New Zealand, they would have daylight saving time starting about when we end and ending about when we start.
Now, there was a time before Congress standardized the time change here in the U.S. when systems even varied city by city. How chaotic was that?
Well, that was a very interesting period. After World War II, daylight saving time was put into World War II again to save energy and other benefits for the war. And in fact, was put in only 1 month after Pearl Harbor. So it was a very quick adoption in the U.S. and also around the world because of the fact that it was felt it was very beneficial. After the war, the federal government got rid of it because it was felt to be a wartime measure, but a lot of areas around the country liked it. So they put it in individually. And at that time, you could put it in a state, but you could also put it in a city or town. And so each city and town could have daylight saving time or not. So you wound up with, as it spread around, you had a very chaotic situation where you had some places had daylight saving time, maybe the next town didn't, maybe a third town had daylight saving time, but started and ended on different dates. There's a famous bus ride you could have taken from Moundsville, West Virginia to Steubenville, Ohio. It was 35 miles. And because the bus stopped in different towns, some had daylight saving time and some didn't, you would have to change your watch seven times in 35 miles.
We are talking about daylight saving time with David Prerau. He's the author of Seize the Daylight, the curious and contentious story of daylight saving time. Also with us, Dr. Beth Mallow. She's the director of the Sleep Division at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. We're also hearing from you. Sten emailed, I don't find the twice-a-year time shift to be such a problem. I don't get why people find it so problematic. Robin emailed, I'm completely in favor of permanent daylight saving time. I would personally prefer the later sunset year-round. And Heidi tweeted this, I've kept myself and my children in our own private time zone, Eastern Daylight Time, year-round for 10 years now. Plenty of benefits to health and well-being make the scheduling complications worth it. My seasonal affective disorder was cured the first year. Don't wait for the government, just do it. Well, there is a bill in Congress to get rid of the time change, and we'll talk about that next. I'm Jen White. This is 1A from WAMU and NPR.
Changes. It's gonna have to be a different man. Time may change me, but I can't trace time.
The Florida Department of Health is working to increase water safety awareness. Recently, Florida has seen an increase in fatal child drownings. Some tips to keep everyone safe include having attentive adult supervision when children are in or near the water, using barriers to block access to water, learning to swim, and knowing CPR. Water safety is everyone's responsibility. Learn more at watersmartfl.com.
Anita Hill's testimony during Clarence Thomas's 1991 Senate hearings nearly kept him from being confirmed to the U.S. Supreme Court. She's now University Professor of Social Policy, Law, and Women's and Gender Studies at Brandeis University, and she joins us to discuss her decades-long fight for women's rights and gender equality. That's next time on Think. Tonight at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Duncan Fletcher was mayor of Jacksonville in the late 1800s and early 1900s and served as a U.S. Senator for 27 years. I'm Ben Brotmarkle, and coming up on Florida Frontiers, the weekly radio magazine of the Florida Historical Society, will discuss his wife Anna, who was an avid spiritualist, the U.S. District Court, and the Okahumpka Rosenwald School on Florida Frontiers, Monday evening at 6:30 on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from TIAA, dedicated to helping people secure their financial futures with lifetime retirement income. Learn more at TIAA.org/neverrunout. From Zoom, used by 500,000 businesses. With a single platform for video, phone, chat, and conference rooms, Zoom enables real-time collaboration no matter where teams are located. Zoom, how the world connects. And from listeners like you who donate to this NPR station.
I'm Jen White. This is 1A. We're discussing daylight saving time with Dr. Beth Mallow. She's the director of the sleep division at the Vanderbilt University Medical Center. Also with us is David Prerau. He's the author of Seize the Daylight, the curious and contentious story of daylight saving time. We're also hearing from you. Jillian emailed, I'm a union sheet metal worker. We start at 7 a.m. when it's dark, but as of now, it's still daylight when I get home for over an hour. When we fall back, I'll go to work when it's dark and get home when it's getting dark. It makes for a long winter, I feel like, and the weekdays not as personally productive or enjoyable. We also heard from Ian in Cleveland.
This is Ian from Cleveland, Ohio. I do believe that the time change should end. I also believe that daylight savings should go away and we should just be on standard time. Though I have heard a number of senators, congresspeople, whoever, say that they want to keep daylight savings time year round. I think that's a mistake. I also wish that we had referenda in this country because I think this would be a perfect thing to put to the people. Do you all want to have time change anymore? And if not, do you want to stay on daylight savings or do you want to stay on standard? That'd be a perfect time to do a national vote.
Well, joining us now from Golden Valley, Minnesota, is State Representative Mike Freiberg. He's a Democrat who represents a suburb of Minneapolis. Mike, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Jen. It's great to be here.
So you were behind a bill that passed this year that would put all of Minnesota on permanent daylight saving time as soon as Congress allows it. What prompted you to advocate for that change?
Sure. Well, I have two kids. They're 9 and 11 now, but I remember when they were very young and we were trying to sleep train them. And, we would just get to a point where they were sleeping for a consistent stretch and we were able, and our sleep benefited from it. And then just for no discernible reason, based in anything modern, we would have to change the clocks one direction or another. And it was very frustrating for me. I personally don't have a preference between standard time or daylight saving time. However, my sense is more people prefer daylight saving time. So I introduced a bill. I just want to get rid of the clock changes, and I introduced a bill to move to daylight saving time permanently and was lucky enough to have it pass this year.
So you're really just looking for consistency in the time?
Yes. And it does seem like the trend is to move towards daylight saving time permanently. As you noted at the outset, there are 19 states total, I should say, that have done this. There's a bill in Congress. There's bipartisan support for permanent daylight saving time. So to me, it just seemed like we would be an outlier if we went the permanent standard time approach.
Well, we got this tweet from Laurel who says, I grew up in Indiana without DST and I wish we could get rid of it. Twice a year jet lag for no good reason. Disruption in my kids' sleep schedules. Kids waiting in the dark at the bus stop. No thanks. Dr. Mallow, how does the time change affect children specifically?
Well, children are really susceptible because of school. And even though there's movements to make school start later, a lot of schools are still starting at 7:15, 7:30 a.m. So it's dark when kids go to school right now. And that's why the standard time, moving back to standard time, would really help those kids because they would be driving to school. The kids would be driving to school if they're teens, or if they're younger, they'd be waiting in the school bus in the light rather than in the dark in the winter. And that's really important especially for not just safety, but for them being alert in school and being able to get enough sleep at night. If they need that light in the morning to get them to wake up, to be fully alert. And as I mentioned earlier, that morning light helps them go to sleep at a good hour so that they can be well rested for school.
We also got this email from Chavi who says, I am in favor of abolishing time change. It doesn't matter to me which clock we stick to as long as we don't change. I have a child who is on the autism spectrum, and that 1 hour change is a huge adjustment for him. He is 13 years old, and since I can remember, that 1 hour shift caused behavior changes, and it can take him a full 2 weeks to adjust his internal clock and re-regulate himself. Dr. Malo, is it more an issue of consistency than it is whether we're on DST or standard time?
I think there's two things. First of all, I want to point out your viewers, the individual variability is huge. There are people who are going to do fine switching back and forth. There are going to do people who are going to do fine on permanent daylight. The challenge is that many of us are going to be susceptible if we go to permanent daylight because we need that light in the winter, and we don't need that excessive light in the summer. And especially, I do see a lot of kids with autism in my practice, and kids with developmental disabilities, neurologic issues, they really do tend to be more susceptible. So I've heard that a lot from parents of kids with autism, that they're thrown off kilter. And there's two things to remember. One is there's the acute change, which is that when we go from standard to daylight in March, when we go to daylight saving time, there's more strokes that have been reported, more heart attacks, less sleep has been reported in kids. But then there's that chronic effect of being kind of 1 hour off the rest of the year until we go back to standard time, where we're getting that less light in the morning, more light in the summer, and that really can affect us big time in terms of our overall sleep. And we use a fancy term in sleep called circadian misalignment. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a wonky term, but you can think of it as our brains being out of sync with our environment. So we're chronically out of sync from March to November. So it's not just 1 hour, 1 day, something we're going to get over quickly, at least for some people. You know, some people are more susceptible than others.
Now, David, the U.S. actually tried year-round daylight saving time in the 70s. What happened?
Well, I think this is one of the key points that your listeners have to consider. This has been tried. So when we're talking about using daylight saving time year-round, this is not something that has that's theoretical. And people talk about the problems of the time change, which is as you know, in twice a year. But we're talking about the change of the clocks, which affects. It's not just the time change and that 1 week or two that people may be affected, or even a few days, and some people aren't affected at all. The fact that if you have daylight saving time year-round, you would have 4 months of effect. So you're talking about 4 months of effect. And what happened was, in 1974, there was an energy crisis that was caused by an oil embargo, and the government was looking for ways to save energy, so they thought one way would be to extend daylight saving time year-round. So they passed a temporary extension of daylight saving time year-round for 2 years. Well, what happened is the first year came around, and when people actually had it in the winter, daylight saving time in the winter, it became very, very unpopular very quickly, nationwide. And so people didn't like getting up in the pitch dark, going to work in the pitch dark, sending their kids to school in the dark. It was very unpleasant, and people didn't like it. And so what happened was, even though it was only a two-year experiment, the popular opinion caused Congress to repeal the second year of the 2 years. And they only had daylight saving time in the winter for 1 year in 1974 because it was so unpopular. So you have to think about that. It's not just the time change. It's the 4 months of getting up in the dark, and in northern parts of the country, in the dark and cold. As I said, when it was actually tried, it's easy to think about just not changing your clock. But when it was actually tried, it was very unpopular.
We're talking about daylight saving time with David Perau. He's the author of Seize the Daylight, the curious and contentious story of daylight saving time. Also with us, Dr. Beth Mallow. She's the director of the Sleep Division at Vanderbilt University Medical Center, and Minnesota State Representative Mike Freiberg. He's a Democrat who represents a suburb of Minneapolis. We also want to hear from you. Kate tweeted, "Make standard time permanent. DST is the biggest scam ever." And Lance emailed, "I lived long in Hawaii and never reset my clocks, and I loved it." What do you think of our time change ritual? You can comment on our Facebook page, tweet us at 1A, or send us an email at 1A@WAMU.org. Now, Sean thinks doing away with the time change should be an easy win.
My name is Sean. I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio, and I, like most people, do not like changing the clocks. Ohio actually has a bill called the Ohio Sunshine Protection Act, but due to some legal jargon, it can't actually be enforced. So we need Congress to step up to the plate and get it done. It would be an easy win.
Mike, what is that legal jargon Sean's talking about?
Yeah, I wouldn't, it's not legal jargon so much. It is federal law. However, right now states do have the ability to change to standard time permanently. And Arizona has done that. That's why if you go there, you need to make extra sure you know what time you're going into, actually. So Arizona's on standard time permanently, but states do not have the ability under federal law right now to change to daylight saving time permanently. So there are 19 states that have passed laws that would implement permanent daylight saving time, but only when Congress actually goes ahead and changes the law to give them the ability to do that. So there are sort of conditional laws that have been passed that say those states will go to permanent DST once given congressional authorization.
Now, Hawaii and most of Arizona, except for the Navajo Nation, are on standard time year-round. If part of the goal for you was to get rid of the time change, why not push for Minnesota to go on permanent standard time? Then you wouldn't have to wait for Congress.
Sure. Thank you for the question. There are benefits to going to permanent daylight saving time. I mean, certainly changing the clocks disrupts our sleep patterns. But regarding daylight saving time specifically, there are several benefits to it. So one is traffic safety. The evening rush hour is twice as fatal as the morning, and daylight saving time brings an extra hour of sunlight into the evening to mitigate those risks. There's impact on crime. Moving sunlight into the evening hours has a greater impact on the prevention of crime than it does in the morning. There are benefits to recreation and commerce to permanent daylight saving time. And my sense is just, certainly there are people who would prefer permanent standard time, and we've heard from them. I mean, you could maybe call them early risers. But my sense is there are maybe more people out there who like that extra hour of sunlight in the evening. They don't like coming home from work in the dark and would prefer a permanent daylight saving time approach. So those are kind of the reasons I decided to go with the permanent daylight saving time approach.
Well, we got this email from Andy who says, daylight saving time in the summer provides beneficial evening hours of daylight in the summer. Standard time in the winter allows children to catch the school bus in the morning light most of the winter. One clock change every 6 months is a small price to pay for those benefits. To those determined to stay on the same time year-round, I say be careful what you wish for. Dr. Mallow, from a health perspective, you think permanent standard time, like Arizona and Hawaii, is the best answer. Why?
I do. I think permanent standard time is the healthy choice. And I think Representative Freiberg makes some great points. Some of us really do prefer that light in the evening, playing tennis, golf, whatever. But there are a lot of vulnerable people who can't necessarily sleep in or, roll out of bed and get on a Zoom meeting at 7 a.m. and work from home. The people who have to actually get in their cars and drive to work at 6:30 in the morning are students, our kids who have to go to school and need in-person learning. They need that morning light. And that's why I'm an advocate. And when you don't get that morning light, and when you get light too late in the day, like with the summer, with the daylight saving time, you get sleep deprived. And that is a major health issue. It leads to us putting on weight, more risk for diabetes, heart disease. It even affects our our ability to, our mood. Think about when you haven't slept well. You're more likely to send that nasty tweet or email that you'll regret later. And our kids, they're really stressed right now, and they're more at risk for self-harm and depression when they're not getting that sleep that they need, that really precious sleep they need to get at night. And that's why I'm an advocate for the permanent standard time for those vulnerable populations that can't control their work hours or their school hours.
Now, David, in 2007, you helped the Bush administration put us on the March to November daylight saving time schedule we have now, and you think we should keep it that way. Why?
Right. Well, as I said, we've tried year-round daylight saving time, and nobody liked it. I had a lot of problems. So that's real. That's real. That's not figurative. So it is a pain, and it does have impact on many people, the change of time. But the fact that you're making a change that affects 4 months of the year, in the winter, you have more light in the winter, in the winter mornings, and that's proven very, very useful and very popular. And yet, you still have the benefits of daylight saving time most of the year. In 2008, when we passed that last law was actually 2007 that took into effect. The idea was to extend daylight saving time for as long as we could, and yet not get into very dark winter mornings. And that's why we extended it a little bit in the spring and a little bit in the fall, and now it starts at the second week in March to the first week in November. And that was about as far as we felt we could go without starting to have really very dark mornings. And so that's what we did. If you had daylight saving time in the winter, for example, you would have sunrises around 8:30 in places like New York, Chicago, San Francisco, Dallas, Denver. And you'd have sunrises about 9 a.m. in places like Detroit, Indianapolis, Minneapolis, and Seattle. So a lot of those people would be waking up in the dark, going to work in the dark, sending their kids to school in the dark. And as I said, it's proven very unpopular and very negative, especially in colder areas as well, which is dark and cold.
Well, we're hearing from lots of you with your takes on daylight saving time. Katie emailed, in my family, we start getting up 10 minutes earlier every day, a week before the time change. Ooh, Katie, that is discipline. 10 minutes is much easier to accommodate than a whole hour. Families with kids having difficulty could spread it out over 2 weeks to make it even more gradual. I'd be happy to pick one and stick with it. And Lila emailed, I have bipolar disorder and I loathe and dread daylight saving time. Adjusting my routine to the changing time is extraordinarily stressful, and it can exacerbate symptoms for weeks or months. It can sometimes induce an episode. And we got this email from Margaret who says, I vote we change it next Sunday and never change it again. We're discussing why we're changing our clocks again this weekend with Dr. Beth Mallow. She's the director of the Sleep Division at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. Also with us, David Prerau. He's the author of Seize the Daylight, the curious and contentious story of daylight saving time, and Minnesota State Representative Mike Freiberg. He's a Democrat who represents a suburb of Minneapolis. Muggy says, I don't care if it's standard or daylight time, just pick one and stick with it. I'm Jen White. More from you and our guests in a moment.
Stop the clocks, I'm killing time. I don't ever want this to end. And you said that makes two of us. Stop the clocks.
I'm Marco Werman. We're living through history, and the world's newsroom has the first draft.
We are still on track for climate catastrophe, even with the last announcements that were made.
Looking for answers and making sense of global events as they happen.
We all have our fingers crossed that when Biden takes the stage in Glasgow, that he's got something to show for it.
Join us on The World.
This afternoon at 3, here on WJCT News 89.9.
I'm Scott Tong. As world leaders talk climate policy in Scotland, we speak to the envoy from the Marshall Islands, where climate change is an existential threat.
When you have the double whammy of brackish well water and a lack of rain, life becomes extremely challenging and even untenable.
That's next time on Here and Now.
Today at 2 on WJCT News 89.9.
On the next Fresh Air, filmmaker Edgar Wright.
His movies include Baby Driver and Shaun of the Dead. His newest is a thriller called Last Night in Soho. It's about a young woman who is transported in her dreams into the swinging 60s of London, where she lives out the life of another woman. At first thrilling, the dreams become nightmares that haunt her waking hours. Join us.
Today at noon on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Saatva, offering 7 different mattresses, including the Saatva Classic, a mattress with 2 layers of coils designed to provide comfort and support. Learn more at Saatva, SAATVA.com. And from DuckDuckGo, committed to making privacy online simple. Used by tens of millions, they offer internet privacy with one download. DuckDuckGo. Privacy simplified at duckduckgo.com.
Back to our conversation in a moment, but first we'd love your help with tomorrow's show. This winter, many families will be celebrating the holidays in person for the first time in a while, which of course is going to be great. But when it comes to friends and family, the advice has always been to avoid certain subjects. No politics, no religion. I'm talking with Celeste Headlee about her new book called Speaking of Race, Why Everybody Needs to Talk About Racism and How to Do It. If you have questions about how to have that conversation and when to have it, leave us a voicemail, 855-236-1A1A. What's your approach, or do you plan to try and dodge anything that will make your friends or family or neighbors feel uncomfortable? The number to call is 855-236-1A1A, or you can send us an audio file with our app 1A Vox Pop, and we'll talk more tomorrow on 1A. Now let's get back to discussing daylight saving time with Dr. Beth Mallow. She's the director of the Sleep Division at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. Also with us, David Perau. He's the author of Seize the Daylight, The Curious and Contentious Story of Daylight Saving Time, and Minnesota State Representative Mike Freiberg. He's a Democrat who represents a suburb of Minneapolis. We got this email from Laura who says, I haven't heard anything about where you live in the country as related to the time zone. I live in Indiana near the western border of the Eastern time zone, and the sun comes up and sets here almost an hour later than the East Coast. Therefore, the time change should be a state-by-state decision. I'd like to stay on standard time year-round. We don't need it to stay light until after 10 p.m. in the summer and stay dark until 8 a.m. in the winter. And Cynthia tweeted, this seems to be a debate predicated on where you live. The farther south, the more you want light at the end of the day, so you can still get something done after work. David, how much of this is driven by geography?
Yes, well, each area of the country has different situation with light. And when I was working on these bills for Congress and for the federal government, we had to try to balance the problems of the North and the South and the East and the West, and what part of the time zone you're in. And so it's very hard. But that's why we try to come up with what we felt was a reasonable compromise that would give the benefits of daylight saving time for most of the year, and yet not have the negatives for the darkest months of the year. And that's what we did. But it is definitely different. It affects different people in different places. But when we actually tried the year-round daylight saving time in 1974, it was unpopular nationwide.
Dr. Mallow, your thoughts? That I grew up as a Midwesterner, and those winter days seemed really long. Well, actually, the days seemed long, and the days seemed short. That's what it was, and the nights seemed really long. So, how much of this is driven by where you live?
Oh, a lot is. I agree with that listener, and people have actually shown that if you live on the western edge of a time zone, you get less sleep. People have actually done studies showing that you're getting less sleep because you're getting too much light at night in the summer, right? And then you're just not getting enough. You're not waking up enough. So because you don't have that light that you need in the winter. So daylight saving time, I think, would exacerbate, if we went to permanent daylight saving time, that would exacerbate those western edge effects where people are getting less sleep because of the geography. So, yeah, I mean, it is a real issue. and it can affect health.
Well, we got this email from Mary who asks, is there any correlation between the changing of the clocks and seasonal affective disorder? Dr. Mallow, do we know?
Well, yeah, I've looked into this, and it is true that we need light to improve seasonal affective disorder. That's a pretty standard accepted treatment. People will even use light boxes in the morning to help them. When I looked at the literature, when I looked at studies, it didn't seem like there was a big difference between light in the afternoon and light in the morning. And in fact, some would argue that light in the morning is more important. And that's why, again, if you have seasonal affective disorder, getting that light in the morning, which is what permanent standard time would ensure, is really important and would be maximized by permanent standard time. So that's another risk of daylight saving time, is you're not going to get that light in the morning like you would with the permanent standard time.
Well, a 2019 Associated Press poll found that 7 in 10 Americans agree that they would rather not change the clocks twice a year. And that's what we heard from a lot of you.
Hi, this is Kevin calling from Buffalo, New York. Just wanted to say that changing the clocks, in my opinion, doesn't make sense at all anymore. Throwing your energy off and trying to adjust to things for a week, twice a year, just doesn't make any sense. So I'm a complete advocate behind having a consistent clock pattern throughout the year.
Hi, my name is Veronica from Morrisville, North Carolina. Daylight savings time reminds me of the farming schedule. Nowadays, that schedule doesn't really apply to most people. And yet we still have daylight savings time so that we could have that extra hour of sun throughout the year. However, in the winter, it really just makes me more tired and oftentimes makes me late for work the following Monday.
Thanks for those messages. Now, Mike, the push in Congress right now to move to permanent daylight saving time is bipartisan. Was the same true for you locally?
Very much so, yeah. I consider myself a fairly liberal Democratic member of the legislature. Minnesota is one of the only states in the country that has a divided legislature right now. So the House where I am is controlled by the Democrats. The state Senate is controlled by the Republicans. The Senate author of the bill is a very conservative state senator from a more rural area than I represent. So, and then we have a fairly long list of co-authors on the bill, both bills as well, and they run the gamut in terms of both party ideology, geography as well. And I mean, and I know that's the case in Congress as well. And just going back to the earlier point too about whether geography matters, I mean, I think there is a national desire for consistency, like your listeners just mentioned. The states that have adopted the permanent daylight saving time approach are all over the country. They're both conservative and liberal. Every corner is represented. So Florida, California, Washington, Maine, northern states like Minnesota, Montana, Idaho, Washington, southern states like Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia. These are all states that have adopted a permanent daylight saving time bill once authorized by Congress.
Well, in Minnesota, what were you able to coalesce around? Was it just, not changing clocks? Was it about, kids getting consistent sleep? What seemed to really stick with people?
Honestly, I would say it depends on the person, and that's true for your listeners who are calling in, and that's true for elected officials as well. I mean, I think some elected officials prefer just not changing the clocks. Some elected officials supported it because they specifically prefer an approach that has more daylight in the evening as opposed to the morning. Some legislators are very conservative and see this as government overreach, adjusting clocks in the middle of the year. So, I would say it's a unique coalition of legislators, kind of unlike any other issue I've worked on, that supported this legislation, and they have a variety of reasons for wanting it.
Well, we have some listeners, quite a few actually, who have a creative solution to this issue that goes along the lines of this email from Larry, who says, why not split the difference between standard and daylight saving time by a half hour? Then don't change. That would reduce the extremes of either times that people object to. And Joyce emailed, what if at 2 a.m. Sunday, we change the clocks to 1:30 a.m.